You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 Goth Talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. Before we get into this episode, I think it is important to provide a bit of a disclaimer or trigger warning at the start, because we will be at various points discussing death, depression, self-harm, and suicide. If you are currently experiencing suicidal thoughts or depression, let me say from me personally, please reach out to someone who can help. I care about you and I understand how you feel. And as hard as it might be, I sincerely ask you to please seek out help. And for that purpose, I will include a link in the show notes with a list of helplines that you can call, text, and reach out to. It's also worth mentioning that in this episode, we are relaying our personal experiences and our personal opinions, and nothing on this episode should be taken or construed as medical advice, right? So please seek out support from a licensed medical professional for these kinds of issues. With that said, we will be covering a lot more on this episode than how we process and think about death and depression. We will also be discussing why Deathrock is so important in the Goth scene, and in a Goth scene that is inundated by darkwave. We will also explore anthropology and talk about what that has to teach us about understanding Goth culture. And there might even be a little bit of chat about Battlestar Galactica going on in there. Before we dig into this episode, however, we've got a couple sponsors for today that I'm very excited to share with you. So please give them a second of your time. Follow the links in the show notes. These are great bands that you should definitely check out. And I will have links to those in the show notes.
Hi, this is MJ Phoenix.
And this is Stephanie Stryker from Amulet. Did you know that you can listen to Amulet on demand? Just ask Siri to play our latest single, Queen of Codependency, on your favorite streaming platform. Thanks to Cemetery Confessions for having us. Now, back to the show.
This is Chris Cantor from Procession Magazine, here to let you know that Mentallo and the Fixer is on tour right now. That's right, one of my favorite industrial bands is on the road and tearing it up across the United States. So go check them out. Also, we're sponsoring the Washington, D.C. show on October 7th at the Renegade in Arlington, Virginia. For more information and tickets, go to renegadeva.com or processionmagazine.com. See you all there.
Hell yes. Two bands I wholeheartedly endorse. Definitely check them out and give them a listen and see them on tour. But as always, I am your host, Danny Ashes, and I'm here with my co-host, Trey. Our guests this episode are Missy, who is the mind behind the Deathrock goth rock band Obsidian out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Ryan, who is the bass player, also from Obsidian. Worth noting, Missy uses they-them pronouns, and Ryan uses he-him pronouns. With that said, though, let's get into introductions. Would you two be so kind as to share how and when you were introduced to goth culture?
I guess in a few different ways. I don't know, for me, it usually will start with movies. Like, I really like The Lost Boys.
Hell yeah.
So that did it. And then when I was really into playing in middle school, I was really into Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And then
excellent.
When I got it's always like this one older friend that's much cooler was like, well, you like Dungeons and Dragons. What about Vampire the Masquerade, and I was like, ooh. And I feel like that kind of opened a lot of doors there. But this friend of mine was pretty influential in like getting me into The Cure, I would say, like from a musical perspective, that and like Joy Division, that was like those two bands at first for me were like I wanted to hear. And of course that gravitated to, other stuff when I got a little deeper into it. I would say like Bauhaus's first album was a big influence on me. Like hearing that just really gritty, aggressive kind of sounds, I like fell in love with it. I love that. But The Cure to me it's almost like the Beatles of goth or something, because there's all these like pleasant songs, but then I really liked the kind of abrasiveness of like Bauhaus's like early album. When I heard that, I was, damn, that is so cool.
That's fair. It's just really rough Beatles too, but I see what your point is.
Yeah.
Four hot dudes. Yeah,
exactly. And they just had so many hits, like I feel like I say that in the sense that I feel like it's an easier barrier of entry than maybe some other bands, more palatable or whatever. I also like really heavy music too. I like doom and like I like all kinds of other heavier genres. So kind of like some of the heavier aspects of like goth music in general always appealed to me, and kind of naturally went down that industrial route too.
Yeah,
we've all dabbled. Yeah,
so like like of course like when I heard like Every Day is Halloween, like that was like a big deal to me too. I was like, yeah, this is so cool. It felt so like when I was younger, it felt like even then it felt kind of like, I don't know, futuristic a little bit, that music.
Yeah.
And then it was like probably bands like that and like Nine Inch Nails and Prodigy and stuff like that kind of even got me into like electronic music. And then I got into like that gothic sort of electronic sound. So yeah, it was a journey there. And then later on, it took me a while to get to a point where I was playing music like beyond a hobby and playing in bands. And I started playing kind of like heavy rock kind of stuff though, and all this stuff. But then as soon as I could, I was like, let me play like what I really wanted to. I wanted it to be cold and with drum machines and synthesizers and all of that. And then that's how kind of me and Missy reconnected in the music scene, because we come from like a scene in Churchill's, this one venue where we both kind of saw each other. We even played a show together. We didn't even know each other. Yeah, but we kind of both emerged in that same sort of scene. But then when I kind of went with this like this solo project of that laboratory is when we met and we started playing shows together. And then down the line, that's how I jump in and join up with Obsidian, which has been awesome. Right.
Hell yeah. What about you, Missy? How did you get into goth?
So when I was younger, I was always into like, B horror films and stuff like that. But really from like the punk scene, I was a little punk rocker throughout high school, and like I wanted to be a punk rocker in middle school. To where like I think like the first introduction to that kind of like sound sonically would not really be like the Misfits, but like Samhain, and then bands like 45 Grave and Christian Death. I was introduced more to like Deathrock first than goth, I would say. I don't even think I really knew what goth was at the time. I guess I thought it was like Hot Topic, like Cradle of Filth style stuff, or metal.
So you saw me in high school. Yes.
Is that how you looked in high school?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Same. Or earlier on in middle school. I remember being like really into like Cold Chamber in middle school.
Yeah.
Before I like got really into like punk rock. But I was like really like into like 80s hardcore So that's kind of where I came across bands like Christian Death, 45 Grave. And then I think the first like real goth band that like appealed to me was when I was like going through like my metal, my black metal phase, my little mayhem phase. And I heard Sex Gang Children. And to me,
Oh, nice.
that sonically just captivated me. Probably more than any band did. Just kind of like the mix, it kind of sounded like Bad Brains and Susie and the Banshees kind of like mashed up a bit.
Okay, yeah.
And it was very just like kind of interesting. It was like aggressive, very punchy bass lines, but also dancey at the same time.
Right.
And then kind of like the loud, shrilly vocals I really liked as well. And then from there, I got into bands like Alien Sex Fiend, Bauhaus I already knew about, but I never really got that into them until that time. And The Cure, I've always been a fan of, is, you know, being a millennial, I grew up. So Florida's kind of weird. It's always South Florida anyways. It's always been kind of stuck in the 80s because that was like its known heyday. So there's always kind of like this like lingering new wave sort of aesthetic going on until I would say EDM took off in like 2010s, and then the whole like Miami focus shifted into like that EDM culture.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I guess that sort of explains where the Obsidian sound comes from, because, you know, I was thinking about re-listening to the album, and I was thinking, I can't believe it's been over a year already since this came out. But there's, you know, so much good Deathrock sound on that album, but there are a lot of wider influences you all pulled from with the synth melodies, and there's some post-punk kind of stuff in there. But I was thinking about Deathrock as a genre and how there aren't really that many Deathrock bands, especially now. Well, actually now there are more, but there was a big lull there for a while post sort of the Deathrock revival. You know, there's that running joke about too goth for punk, too punk for wait, how does that go? Too punk for goth, too goth for
punk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just always sort of felt like an underappreciated child of goth in a way. So I was just curious what drew you towards Deathrock and what the response to that has been in a sort of dark wave scene.
I really feel like with that, it was the first record, Only Theater of Pain by Christian Death. Kind of Roz's vocals with like Rick Agnew's aggressive guitar playing with the overdone chorus pedal really drew me in. I think that's just really a cool tone. Tonality wise, I myself try and meet in between like Flock of Seagulls and Rick Agnew. So
okay. Yeah.
The funny thing is, even though Christian Death is usually heralded as a big death rock band, I find they're one of the less death rocky sounding bands in the genre. They are kind of their own thing.
Definitely. Does sound very similar to like a Reagan Youth or like Black Flags or like lo-fi recorded music that's got like more aggressive kind of backbeats. I think it's really just kind of like the presentation of it's a lot prettier sonically than those bands.
Yeah, Roz is a very smooth and kind of graceful singer, which doesn't really make you think of punk as much. And some of the musical work, Rick and then especially Valor later on, is a little bit more adventurous than a lot of punk-based stuff tends to be.
Yeah,
because that's just been my opinion of it.
I don't acknowledge Valor as canon.
Not as a lead singer, definitely, but I'm talking when he was as a guitarist. While it was still Roz's band, I can acknowledge Valor there, but no, I'm not a big Christian Death post Roz. That doesn't work.
Just really particularly into like Rick Agnew's kind of like song structuring with the Roz more so. So really, not that I like the other as two records after that. I believe with Roz and Valor together before a Shadow Project. Those records don't really appeal to me. I feel like the first time I heard Only Theater of Pain, there was just something that was just like kind of like transports me back to high school, kind of being a bad kid.
Well, it's, you know, to your point, Trey, I do think it's strange that a lot of the criticism I hear about Deathrock, when I was sort of thinking about like, why is it not as popular, I guess, for lack of a better word, is just sort of the same that I hear with goth rock as well, actually, is just that people saying it sort of kind of sounds too similar. But I do think there's a pretty broad range of, whether it's like more Christian death style or kind of D-beat hardcore punk, or even like the kind of like carnival death rock kind of campy, creepy vaudeville stuff. It frustrates me a bit when I hear that people saying, "Oh, death rock kind of all sounds the same," because you can kind of say that about any genre, really. It kind of just depends on who you're listening to.
The point of the genre,
especially coming out of punk, because punk, at least stereotypically, is the three chords in a story is very sonically usually very similar. There, of course, are variances, and the singers are what usually a lot of times will bring about the biggest difference in my experience with punk. But I will admit, as I've admitted many times, that I'm not deep into punk, so I'm talking as a somewhat outsider who has delved in a little bit. But punk is stereotypically very formulaic and garage rock revival kind of simplistic, but very emotional and powerful that way. So I can see coming out of that the same stereotype tars death rock as well. I would definitely say death rock is more adventurous than most punk that I've heard. It was sort of a step in the other direction, maybe why it's too goth for punk, because it's breaking some of those, if you are punk, you have to be this sort of rules that can sometimes creep into that scene.
Yeah, I think what's neat about death rock is kind of like where what you're saying, kind of like a lot of the other bands are kind of doing more of that. The dark wave thing is more of a popular thing, or like less members in the band, or just a synth of fake drums on backing tracks, or like a drum machine, something like that. I feel like the goth scene loses out on what a really cool band sounds like, a full band sounds like, from a live perspective. That you kind of get used to just people playing a little more like cold, maybe behind some stuff, more DJ style, and I can attest to this already playing with Obsidian. I would say when we play live, we bring the energy of what a punk band or a hardcore band would be, that full volume, like you hear the amps, you hear like a real drummer. I think it brings that sort of fun back into the goth scene that is missing. And when we play with other bands that are, in venues where maybe the electronic drums don't slap as hard or whatever, there's a marked difference, like when you, from a live experience, it's fun. And it was pretty neat because at the last show we played, there was somebody there who really liked punk music and actually came up to me. I don't know if I told you this, Missy. Came over to me and they were like, "Oh man, I don't often like bands like, goth bands or whatever, but you guys were freaking awesome," and I could just, and it's because, they love punk. And so it kind of, there's a crossover with what we're doing there with that energy and that vibe, that live vibe. So it's fun to bring that, because I think that's missing a little bit when there's too many bands going too far into the electronic realm. Maybe they have instruments, but they're more like withdrawn. They're like quieter on stage. That's what makes a rock show fun. And I feel like that'll always be the case. And the further we go into like a future where it's going to get more electronic or more freaking AI driven, I feel like that's going to be even more unique and neat to see a full band live,
Yeah.
Punk definitely has a lock on that live show dynamic, that very visceral, get everybody involved, bring the audience in with you, and take everybody just on a wild ride.
Yeah, I agree. In like the broader sense you're talking about, where I think death rock and goth rock kind of add a lot of depth to goth as a subculture, just sort of musically, stylistically, even ideologically a lot of times, because I think death rock bands tend to be more political in general. And I guess, I don't know, it's, you talked about the punk roots of it and the sort of more harsh aspects of the music. I think I think maybe just because goth is generally a kind of romantic leaning culture, that I think more broadly romance in music has sort of been associated with synths a lot the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, just sort of those kinds of melodies, and that might be part of the reason why it's been less well received. I don't know.
I mean, that could be. Usually when I think of romantic music, I'm more going to like a classical feel, which is
String
also something that goths gravitate to. And synths are a good way, if you can't afford to hire a string quartet, to get some of that. Yeah, that's sort of symphonic feel. That and the heavy reverb is like a giant symphonic hall.
No, for sure. I was gonna say like bands like I love
patch.
Cocteau Twins, for instance, and they get really ethereal and stuff and almost classical sounding, and especially their earlier gothy stuff. And it's like a lot of guitar pedals. It's just a lot of effects, because guitars can get into that synth realm. But
let's say that too. There's a lot of like parallel genres with like say like shoegaze and other like kind of like subgenres that like spurred away from punk as well. Like industrial, of course, and also shoegaze, indie rock in general, and even like, because I remember before I was referring to it as post punk, we'd call it like art punk.
Yeah.
Back when we talk about like Gang of Four, and those bands, we'd be like, oh, art punk. I guess it was none of us really online as much to really know like the proper terminology or something. But yeah, I feel like a lot of that kind of like gives a lot of like room to play within like kind of like the descendants of like the punk music tree.
Right. Yeah. Does that annoy you as a musician, trying to find labels for the music you're playing?
I just kind of like to write what I like to write. Granted, I will like separate. So for example, like when we're like right now, we have some more Deathrocky songs that we're probably gonna like release as a separate EP after the next full length we do. Just to kind of have better, I hate to say this, marketing for it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's definitely kind of like a factor because we have been criticized before. Probably the thing I get the most criticism for is like guitar solos. But I'm really into Prince and kind of that like 80s pop Minnesota sound he developed. Okay. And I really like that kind of like funk element and also that kind of like shreddy style as well.
Definitely a lot of guitar solos come out of Prince. Yeah.
Yeah. But I get like that often about guitar solos. Like, the guitar solo ruins a song.
Yeah, goths don't tend to they love a saxophone solo, but for some reason...
Sure. Honestly, they're the same thing.
Just pops out of nowhere,
They are the same thing, yeah.
Like, I think Danger Zone is the perfect example by Kenny Loggins. It has the guitar solo, then the sax solo does the guitar solo on the outro.
I mean, speaking of disparities between sort of synth-based and instrument-based bands, it seems like electronic bands tend to have a lot of just extra songs laying around that they don't release, and then like full bands tend to like sort of repurpose or rework stuff that maybe didn't make it on the album as like an EP or another single or something like that. What's your sort of songwriting process among everyone?
So previously it would be more of me just writing an entire song and then like teaching it to the other members. Now with the newer lineup with Ryan and Danny on drums, there's a lot more like kind of like riff play. Like one of us will have a part and then we'll expand on that part. And it feels more like a band writing a song now as opposed to like a solo artist trying to herd a bunch of cats. Which being in a band is that. It's herding cats.
Yeah, so I have heard. Sure. Then sort of speaking about songwriting, what's your takes on album or crafting an album, or, the idea of the music industry being singles focused or people listening to playlists instead of full albums? Does that affect you? As a full piece band, we're affected greatly by that. But it is what it is. I don't really hold any ill will towards it because it is pretty cool that it is pulled away from labels more and a lot more like individuals are able to artistically express themselves, which I like.
I think that's pretty cool and a positive, but it does have us working a little bit harder, especially to get recognized because we can't release songs as fastly as someone at the home studio with that's just all like synthesizers and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, and you kind of traded labels for somewhat abusive and manipulative platforms now.
Oh,
Streaming
definitely.
platforms are their own hazard.
And that's a whole thing of like kind of like a new payola in a way. There's a lot of people have to people have to get their Spotify numbers up in order to get on like the big music festivals or to get any kind of like review recognition and stuff like that. So there will be a lot of like just advertising and pitching and paid pitching they have to do, which is a whole nightmare sequence in of itself.
Is a nightmare.
Yeah. I personally, we got to do this stuff. I personally hate this, just because I love albums so much. Like, I really love sitting with albums. That's
so same. Just like looking through like the artwork and the booklet and
I love
everything,
that.
holding it.
Like from The Cure, I really like the album Faith, and I just love the whole mood in that album and the artwork and all of that goes with it. Just getting immersed into an album like that. I really like this Iggy Pop's album, The Idiot. I really think that's like super proto-goth. So it's such a fucking cool album. I love it. And it's neat to just like sit with all those songs that happen in that moment of time, And I do feel that the younger generations are kind of losing that because it's more like, okay, I like this one song and that's all I know. And, maybe kind of like it separates you from the whole mood that an artist can present during a period of time,
Yeah, I guess it's different types of storytelling. You're like long form versus short form, and I mean everything's moving to short form, and I think largely that's a monetary sort of capital driven trend.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Absolutely. And maybe an attention deficit trend.
Think of like kind of like big music distribution formats now are pretty much like TikTok videos and things like that. So if you have a nice short song that's very easy to dance to and lip sync to, so you have more marketability for like very cookie cutter sort of like singles. Kind of like when I guess like the radio was really popping off with like rock music. You had really short songs as well at that time period as well that were very bubblegum poppy.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to have more than a 3-minute song.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I like really long songs personally. I like to let the drone take off as much as possible.
Dream Theater. Whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
And not really progressive, but just kind of like Bela Lugosi's Dead, just really like drone out for like ever. Yeah. Like I like to build that like atmosphere and kind of just get engulfed by it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on the singles market.
Me? Well, I mean, I think we can have both. I think both have their own place. I do like singles and I do like playlists, but I also grew up listening to albums and sitting in my room with headphones on and just letting this sort of transport me. And it does bother me personally, and just in my own tendencies, that with my ADHD was part of the problem, but like those quick dopamine hits are really attractive and I really get sucked into that. And so album craft does kind of feel like a lost art, because I really loved sort of like concept albums, like something that would purposefully tell you a story, and you don't get that kind of emotional engagement in that way from just one song.
For sure.
Which I don't think that's bad. It's just different. But because that's all that there is in a lot of ways, it has limited the ability of musicians to do that, to not feel the pressure to have to do that kind of stuff.
Have you listened to the album Low from David Bowie? Have you heard that one? Like, I love, like, that's just to me like a perfect example. I freaking love that album. But like the first side is like a bunch of songs, and it's like, they're all different, but it's more somewhat typical song structures. When you flip it over now to the other side, now you're in this this like whole thing that for this Berlin sound that Bowie was really into, with synths and almost like influenced by Kraftwerk and like soundscapes and really moody stuff. It's so cool. Like that album, it's just so neat because like that album, I didn't quite like it the first time I heard it, and then it grew on me. It's like one of those things. Like I feel like that usually happens with albums I really like. At first, I'm always like, maybe, and then I come back to it. I'm like, damn, this is this is amazing. That one really influenced me because it really embodies that sort of album vibe. Because there's different moods, and then I'm like, okay, I pull out the album and go, what mood am I in? Side A, side B, like what's up? You know, it's neat to be able to do that.
What do you think, Trey? You got thoughts?
It's really kind of interesting because I mean, I grew up with albums, and I always listen to and collect music on albums. Even when I was like heavy into, downloading off of your various whatever pirate sites. Yeah. Technically, I downloaded discographies. I didn't even just do albums. If I was trying to discover an artist, I'd be like, let's download everything. And I found singles annoying because, well, it's mixed. It depends on the band. I find both sides annoying, but when the singles are just a couple of tracks off of the album, I'll just get the album. But then like the Beatles era, when they would release albums with certain tracks and the singles were totally different tracks, but they were only singles. That's almost even more frustrating. So I definitely collect in albums, but I listen to songs, not necessarily singles, but I don't necessarily gravitate towards a whole album most of the time, unless there's a very clear through line, like some of those concept albums where you have like a whole story going through it and you can track the whole thing. If they're just thematically similar, I don't tend to gravitate towards that, at least as an album object so much. And I never really got that into the experience of listening to an album where you're sitting down and looking through album art and stuff. I will read lyrics if they're included, but that can be done on a track by track basis. That's not necessarily part of the album experience as much in my mind. So it's interesting that I like albums as a concept, as a package to obtain music from, but I tend to gravitate more towards individual songs. And like as an example, when we discussed, what's your favorite? I think we've had a couple of episodes where we're discussing, or just maybe talking, or discussing your favorite album of band X.
Yeah.
And I always struggle to name a favorite album. What I have to do is go through the track list and say which one has the most songs I like, and that one is by default my favorite album.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, well, speaking of albums, now that we're kind of lubed up here, we can get into the serious stuff. So 19 Dead, I know one of obviously the major theme of that is about loss and people who have died. So I wanted to kind of talk through some aspects of death and loss, but before we kind of do that, it would probably help to set up that context of where those themes in the album came out of, why you wrote the album about that, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, so that was like all the songs, not all the songs, but majority of them were like pretty much in memoriam of people that we knew. Like Memories is about our merch person that overdosed, unfortunately. Non-Disclosure, which is an older song, which I wrote essentially when the band, I think that was like the second song I wrote with Obsidian, and it was on our Swamp EP. But it wasn't aggressive enough, I felt then. That was actually about the Parkland shooting. At the time, I was working at a funeral home in Broward County, which is the same county as Parkland. And so we took 7, and the song's pretty much autobiographical on that, kind of what I witnessed from that situation. And also one of my classmates at the state college, when I was in state college, she was taking German 1. Her name was Carmen Schentrump, and she unfortunately was one of the victims at Parkland.
Yeah.
So it was a really like kind of like close to home scenario. And then I see my friend's little sister all over the news, and then the right wing,
Wow.
like Fox is like dragging her through because she had like a Cuban flag on her jacket or something like that.
Jesus
So it was
Christ.
really,
Yeah.
really kind of like an ugly time. And then Decay
Yeah.
was about like my friend Wyatt, who owned like a punk rock bar that we used to like play at a lot, and he unfortunately committed suicide.
Mhm.
So pretty much majority of the songs on there are about uh they're like essentially like memorials to friends that I had.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh I really appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons why I love this album. Well, there's a lot of reasons about that, but just to tie back in with um the romantic part of goth music, I think I've had this issue with goth for a while, where I think we sometimes tend to, even though we pride ourselves on being open about death, I think a lot of goth leans more towards like a gothic literature, sort of like romanticized version of death, which I think can sometimes be, I don't know, maladaptive, or just kind of like not a great coping mechanism. Not that it's all bad, because I mean, I've being goth has helped me be more familiar with death and work through that. But I do think there's a sort of a fantastical way goth tends to talk about death that maybe doesn't address the real the pain or the existential dread or the social aspect that comes with that. And so I appreciate the direction the album is coming from.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think there is like a lack of like a lot of like material death within goth, and it's just kind of
Yeah,
like horror movie romanticization of it.
right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's a very like common thing. I feel like that's kind of dispersed a bit more now, though. Kind of that generic like goth caricature that you'd meet at goth night, where they're,
Right.
intentionally lowering their voice and not like speaking in one word phrases, is kind of
Right.
gone now.
That's I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, that's obviously a lot of tragedy that you've been through. What's your sort of, I don't know, a philosophy on death is not a great way to say that. How do you kind of conceptualize death to be able to work through the grief and sort of like accepting your own mortality and that?
Would you like to go first, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I've I've definitely I've had my experience with death. Uh, I guess honestly, for me in my life, there's like a before and after moment, and it
Mm.
revolves around my mother dying.
Mhm.
Okay.
When I was in my early 20s, and like my mom is like my best friend, and it's like
Yeah.
that love you have from your mother, it's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. And when she passed away, it completely changed me, and so I felt like before that, um I was even it's really crazy for me because when you're young, you feel like you're never going to die, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you feel a lot more indestructible. So much so for me, I was pretty confused when I was younger. I've changed a lot, but because I was in JOTC, I kind of was in like a high school to military pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it was funny because I was always hanging out with like my goth friends in high school, and I'm like in my JOTC uniform and all this stuff, like, um, but 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 I was like running towards the military, like, oh man, because I feel like I was attracted to the military in the sense that it felt like it was bringing order into my life, maybe
Yeah.
something I could control, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just like I feel like any person kind of wants to feel part of like a bigger group, like you
Right.
have this purpose, right? And the military is great at going, hey, we got this purpose here for you,
Yep.
Yep.
and I I fell for that. I never really was like, oh, I can't wait to go there and, give it to them or like
Yeah.
kill people. Like it wasn't, for
Yeah.
me, it was more about like learning how to survive out like in the woods and do stuff like that. I was always into like stuff like that. And I was always thinking about like, man, inevitably you're gonna have to kill some people, and it's interesting how even like the vernacular and how you talk about killing in the military is like, they'll call it like Charlie, like
Right.
they'll like give it a name to lessen it,
Depersonalize. Yeah.
depersonalize. Oh, the terrorists. Oh, the terrorists. Oh, they're bad people,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like it's interesting how it makes it separates you from the horror of what you're doing. You're taking another person's life, and it's crazy. And so to like, so I had a really immature idea of kind of like death at that point, I felt like, and I'm like running towards it, knowing that I'm gonna have to deal with like handing out death to people, which is like wild. But then when my mother passed away, that like literally changed everything for me about the meaning of death, because at that when that happened, then I was like, I honestly like I made it a point to get out of the military as soon as that happened. My mother never wanted me to be in it in the first place. She was always like, "Oh, I'm proud of you, but damn,
Mhm.
And so I got out of it like as soon as I could after she passed. Like I could never after that imagine like inflicting that sort of pain on somebody else. Like now I knew what that felt like. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, like it changed my whole perspective on mortality and all of that. And it's hard because I feel like also as you grow older, your relationship with death starts changing. You start seeing more people, friends of yours, like how
Yeah.
Missy was saying, pass away. It's not it's unfortunate, and then it's hard. When somebody has a funeral, in a lot of ways, you would rather it be kind of a celebration, right?
Hmm.
And it's interesting because like in history, like there has been civilizations I believe it's the Incas, like in Peruvian, like
Oh, with the
culture.
mummified emperors they
Yeah,
would
like
carry on with.
yeah, that they basically man, they would keep the mummified dead of their family, and they would celebrate it, which is like crazy to think about. They
Yeah.
would even dig out like remnants of their family as and like hold it up and not be afraid of it, like how we are kind of
Yeah.
more in the Western culture. So it's interesting how Western culture makes you think about death. Definitely there's the Eastern philosophy of like, hey, well, yeah, you die now, but you reincarnate, you know. But
Right.
then the more Christian idea of you got this one life, you better get it right, is
But you got to live it by rules too.
live it by rules, yeah,
Yeah.
so that you don't mess something up. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's interesting, and I'm personally, I don't consider myself atheist, but I'm definitely not. It's hard for me to ascribe to any organized religion. So when
Mhm.
you don't have, I feel like just like our basic needs want us to have like something like that to think about. And because it's easier, right, to rationalize death if you think you know what's going to happen next, right?
Well,
Right.
just
And
Yeah.
thinking that there is a next is the one of the bigger
right,
things.
right. And so I grapple with this a lot. I mean, it's hard, In one way, I think like, we should celebrate the life we have and and try to live it the best we can because um, that's really all we can do.
Right.
And it's hard because you know when others die though around you, that's when it really like it's so like it's hard to make it like a positive thing, and I feel like there's so many things that like I wish that I can make it more of a positive thing, that we could just try to see it for what the best thing that person was. And but it's sad, you know, to lose. I'm a sentimental person, like to lose things, like to lose the ideas or to the way that used to have this friend that used to be able to bounce off ideas off of them, and the way they thought was always so interesting, you know. So it's unfortunate to lose those things, but so I struggle. Like I do think that I do think that there must be something that we don't understand coming next. But when you don't have like religion, I do feel like it's harder. Like you have to be a little more secured in your beliefs, you know, especially if you're sick, you know, you're getting closer to death, you know. Imagine you must start thinking like, hey, what's going to happen next, you know?
Yeah. What I like to try and do is when, you know, speaking to someone that you used to bounce ideas off of and stuff, I like to imagine sort of what they might have said and just think about who they are as a person and still kind of talk to them in that way. I mean, I really appreciate everything you just said. I have my own sort of thoughts. I don't want to interrupt. But I think that's really beautifully expressed and a very real experience that a lot of us relate to. Yeah.
The thing that trips me out, and I won't go too far on this one because we could go for a while on this one, is I start thinking of this weird future that we could potentially get into, where imagine that you could back up your thoughts and memories somewhere on a cloud.
Sure.
And you get into a car accident and then, oh, it's all good. We'll just bring those memories into this backup body. Probably. Yeah, I'm sure it is. It's definitely in Battlestar Galactica.
Black Mirror didn't go that far. Black Mirror went with they scrape all of your social media presence and make an AI that becomes you as a virtual
that's even
person.
more
but
dystopian.
They do put that into a body. That's the last thing, is that there's a robotic body that they put it into, but it's not expressed as this is an actual download of the person. It's a construct based upon their social media presence.
Right.
There's short stories in existence and some novels where there is that concept of backing up and then reloading yourself, a sense of immortality and risk taking and all that you can do when you just know, oh, well, when was your last backup? Well, you'll miss a couple of days of your life. You'll forget that, but
right.
You know, you'll be back.
What's stranger though? I mean, imagine, like, would you want some people to be? Do you want Trump to have that going on, where we have to deal with Trump for 1,000 years? You know,
it's only the rich people that would be able to do
first.
That. Yeah.
Definitely be Trump and Musk.
Yeah. So that's scary. That's why some things are. It's like.
Well, it also asks the question of who, a very existential question of who are we? Are we just our memories? Are we just our thoughts? Are we just
exactly?
You know, and that is a very that's a big conversation.
I feel like we're going to grapple with that as a society more in this future that we're going. This strange future that we're going into. I really feel like this question is going to come up a lot more, because we're getting into like a full, like very much into like a full transhumanism thing. So we're going to have to really start thinking about this more. And like those sci-fi books.
I do appreciate this is maybe the first ever Battlestar Galactica reference on the show. But.
Hell yeah. They did it pretty good in Battlestar Galactica, you know, like they would the Cylons keep coming back and through different bodies and all this stuff. And I always think of this one scene towards the end of it where one of the Cylons is like in the ship and they're talking about, oh, you humans don't even know what true vision is, kind of referring to like how we see in this narrow spectrum of light.
Yeah.
And how they're embraced the full spectrum of light. We don't even perceive the full reality in front of us. You know, I really feel like we're getting because man, we're getting into VR headsets, and then it's going to be like, hey, why don't you just get this eye that has a heads up display so you know where to like what groceries you need to get or something, you know? It's going to start getting weird. And it's going to make us think about death a lot more.
Yeah. I have so many thoughts. I have so many things. Missy, what's your I want to give you a chance here. Share what's your sort of perspective on all this.
I have a very romantic view on death. Like Ryan, I lost my mother only recently, though, to stage 4 cancer, and that's kind of when I started spiraling and starting Obsidian. So I'm pretty much like a hardline like materialist. I don't believe in what can't be proven, so I believe death is simply just death personally. But I think the fact that we're an organism spinning on like a rock in space in itself and experiencing life and able to like understand that is pretty amazing. And it's kind of like overwhelming, like that's kind of the life form we've become over time.
Right.
And in general, like there's so much to it too. Just like I'm very into green burials personally. I think it's very important for our bodies to be returned back into the earth and for flora and fauna to feed off us.
Yeah.
Kind of like a biological cycle can continue. And I think that in of itself is really beautiful and amazing once you get past the existential dread of it.
Which I think to Ryan's point, a lot of that is just kind of baked into or internalized through Western culture or American culture.
Yeah, there's just like a lot of like so I think I was reading a book by, I think his name was Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death in high school, and I remember that like sat
Ernest
with me.
Becker, yeah.
And that sat with me how kind of like there's like this whole idea of denying death to try and like preserve like your life and essence and ideologies. And I always found that to be very interesting.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, it's just making me think. It's also interesting how death, knowing that you're going to die, does create a sense of urgency to get things done. Like as far as a band and music, I'm always thinking like, just keep going at it, keep doing it. I love that. And and I'm always like, let's just keep packing as much experiences of that as I can, you know, because I feel like if you don't, because I think of things like when you don't have a timeline, you're like, oh, I'll get around to doing that, you know?
Definitely. There is like motivation in like living like a very ineffective life, because as far as we know, materialistically, we only have one life. That's the only guarantee, is that we're like alive right now, pretty much. Unless like, you know, you're in a solipsism or something like that.
No, for sure.
Elon Musk sure is.
Yeah, he could read some more books, I feel.
Yeah.
With that.
Has he read a book is the question.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm probably somewhere in between the two of you, sort of hard materialist versus more agnostic. I will say one of the themes that has been popping up weirdly in my life the last few weeks has been this idea of carrying the dead with you, and sort of this concept of the dead remaining part of the world through our conversations about them and to ourselves and to others. And I don't really write that off as like, oh, I'm just talking to myself, or I'm just talking about memories of someone who died, as if it's this like static state that no longer interacts with the world. The way that I think about my friends or my pets who have died is that they're still kind of acting in the world, but just in a different way. For example, my friends Sanctus Monium and Mary Millions, who have died now, they are on past episodes of the podcast. So people can listen to them talk, and the people listening will have their lives kind of directly impacted by those recordings. So in that way,
absolutely.
I feel like Mary and Misty are still kind of creating change in the world. And
that's so true. That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that really resonates with me. You're so right about that.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking about with 19 Dead as well, where you have those people kind of still live on in that way. And I can listen to the album, and those people are influencing my life, because it's impacting me, how I feel, what I'm thinking, what I do the rest of the day. And so in that way, they're sort of still agents in the world. So it's not it's not an essentialist view where we are kind of fundamental. There's something fundamental about us. It's more this idea that who we are and what the world is kind of brought out through all these interactions between organisms and material objects, and the actions that we take. So the act of sharing memories with our friends and with ourselves and the world around us changes the world around us, changes who we are, and has like a real material impact on the world.
I'd say definitely. Like, just thinking of I'm really into folk music. I've been in like folk and folk punk bands in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking of John Brown's Body, and how impactful that was with rewriting the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and how that was saying in the Civil War against the Confederacy, and kind of not just invoking the memory of him, but kind of using it as a battle cry as well, that his death wasn't in vain and his legacy carries on with the abolitionist movement, things like that.
When and thinking about that, I always think in the past how many maybe illiterate songwriters there were that were there's all these genres of music that we think we invented recently. We have no freaking clue that there was a goth scene, I don't know, in the 1200s, and it had to do with some sort of I don't know, hurdy-gurdy or some crazy old instrument, and it just, we know that the stuff that was, written down, right? Even just writing out a song, though, it's not the same, right, as hearing the actual person perform it with that sort of flair that they had. You can write, of course, in music, you can say what feel you want the song to be in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think about how much has kind of died to the air, how much was just there at that moment. And we're in this rare time now, and where you can listen to the voices of people that have passed. And I listen to comedians that I really love,
Mm-hmm.
and I go back to them on YouTube and go through, I just love listening to them talking, interviews and stuff. And they brighten up my day, just cracking up, wow, I didn't even know that, they went on this interview and talked about all this stuff. And it's neat because there is more of an immortalization happening now with the way things are captured, it's kind of incredible. I mean, my mom passed away before technology really took off. So
Mm-hmm.
I have VHS tapes and stuff that I really, really treasure to hear her. And
Mm-hmm.
I even have this little thing where she recorded her voice, and she wrote recorded her voice on this little voice recorder. And it's hard to even listen to that one, because that one's she's telling me how much she misses me. And it's oh my God.
Yeah.
And
it's really beautiful.
It's yeah, it is, but it's it's emotional even thinking about it. But it's kind of crazy where we're at now. And now with the phone, you think about how many photos and videos you have. It's crazy when you think about all this stuff.
Just a social media account too, with a whole archive.
Right.
Of
It's
people that
like,
have passed.
That sort of immortality through artifacts used to be restricted only to a very select few of either very famous
yes,
or very influential writers and statesmen
correct.
and whatnot. Now everybody can create a
Yes.
very elaborate monument to their existence that's just
That
out
point.
there and copied ad infinitum through the internet and various other media platforms.
Yeah, it's incredible, honestly, when you think about that. It's kind of
As long as
mind-blowing.
doesn't pull MySpace and delete everything.
Yeah, but you actually can't delete things off the internet. You can try, but it's there somewhere still.
Yeah, I
Well,
know it.
I mean, I mean, I would just listen to a thing about how the Wayback Machine
It's losing funding.
lost a bunch of. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that they didn't get to in time,
Yeah.
and just I mean, stuff does disappear. I think there is an idea of the internet as this eternal repository, and that's not really the case.
It's not entirely true, but it's a good cautionary tale to be being careful what you put there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But I do like the way that this sort of reflects how history is kind of it's an active agent in the world because we interact with the past and we are shaped by the past, and also the past is shaped by the present because we're sort of changing. The story of what the past was sort of changes over time with our different life experiences and with the way memory works and that kind of thing. And so in that way, if concepts in history are sort of like acting in the world. And so I feel like the dead also act in the world in that way. And it's a little bit of a comfort for me to think of death in that sense.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. We are constantly feeling the momentum of history in our lives, and you see that with like the political movements too, globally as well.
Yeah.
Different like political issues.
Yeah.
Not to go into conflict theory too much, but
Well, yeah. I mean, it's there is a very real suffering to death though as well, as you were kind of saying. Like there is a real pain there. And I think part of what's helped me is sort of thinking about everything is change. Everything, like death is just a kind of change, right? Like the conversation we were having 5 minutes ago, we're all different people. That's a change. That's a kind of death. It's constant. And so sort of trying to constantly recognize that. I think that's kind of a Taoist idea, but I do like to think of like sort of Buddhist concepts as well when thinking about suffering and sort of the like.
I'm kind of actually really into Buddhism on that, like existence of suffering, and the way to achieve enlightenment is to cut that tie. And I do like out of all the religions, I find that to be the most philosophically like sound one personally.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Like even honestly, like having a garden, like because I finally was able to like buy a house. I want to get into the whole story of it, but I when you have a garden, right, and you're able to like get some neat plant, and then I had I had to move it, but anyhow, I have this plant called the Queen of the Night, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really beautiful.
Very goth.
It's very goth. Yeah. It's a type of it's like in a family of like a cactus type of plant, but it produces this flower that blooms only at night, and it blooms once at night. And if you don't catch it by the time the sun comes out, it's already withered away. And when you see it at night, it is like breathtaking. Like honestly, the first time that it popped out, I didn't even see it. I smelt it because it lets out this pungent smell. And it was so crazy. I was just like, it's beautiful looking. It looks like there's even like this like spider almost in it that's white or something. It's so beautiful. If you look at images of it online, you'll see what I mean. But it's so neat. But then it's crazy how quickly that all that beauty and that structure, that all of that, it goes away, and it kind of goes into like the sort of Buddhist belief, like, hey, you know, at one point you're going to be the beautiful flower, and at one point you're going to wither away, you know. And like, as far as the pain part goes, because I've really dealt with this pain part, you know, because of it being my mother and it being so personal to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just want to say to anybody listening who's going through that, it's just like, you can get through that, but you can get through this pain, you know. Like, time really does heal it, you know, because at first it was, you know, I was thinking of taking my own life a lot. It was brutal for me. It was just too much for me, honestly, at first. And with time, you can see the beauty, like the pain burned away. And I hold on to those beautiful moments and thoughts that I had of my mom, and telling stories with family about things that she did. So it's doable. It's doable with anybody struggling with that. Just like, you know, you can get through it. You can definitely get through it. I mean,
also never alone too. Like, there's always a support network. I think that's something good about like kind of a scene that's very kind of into like more macabre and like death concepts, is that you do have a good social network of people, as long as you're not playing too much into a character, to get kind of that like collective nurturing that is needed.
Yeah.
In grieving.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I mean, that's definitely relatable. I think we're going to get into more of that kind of thing in a second. I think for me, what I've been trying to do is become more comfortable with change. You know, when you were talking before about the military and sort of finding a sense of control, that's really something I fall into, of like trying to control everything. And that's one of those Buddhist sort of teachings about the idea of causing yourself suffering by trying to resist anything that changes that might keep us happy or whatever. Like the idea of standing in a river and trying to get it to stop moving. It's causing additional suffering. Whereas if you can work towards accepting impermanence, that
Become
will
the river.
Reduce suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that temporality. Yeah,
absolutely. I it's so true. I mean, it's really your own expectations that bring you so much pain. Like, you need to curb those expectations and just know that like, it's hard because I try to, I do strive for perfection in some things, you know.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
You know, and I really beat myself up over that. And sometimes it even just like destroys my own self-worth, you know. And I've had other people help pull me out of it, and then you start realizing, to get older, it's like those expectations that mess you up. I'd even say, in this very simplistic way, going on a vacation, right? Like on a trip somewhere, you know, let's say you're planning to go to Europe, right? And you're like, man, I want to do like all these things, right? And I've done trips like that where you're like, man, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Hell yeah. And then you get there, the reality of where you're at, and then chaos ensues. You don't meet the expectations of hitting all those spots, right? And you like end up having like a bad time sometimes. You're like, I didn't do all the things I wanted to do. And then it's so funny because going on tour in a band and stuff like that, when you just kind of, less expectation, and you go for the ride, and these weird little things that pop up along the way.
Yeah.
And the journey is the fun part, and just don't get too hung up on like exactly where you need to go. And I've even come to believe that when you travel, just go to a destination, like do some research, but don't get too crazy, like, because I have that tendency of really wanting to like nerd out, like, oh, where, like, I'm missing out if I don't do all of this. But it's like, no, it's okay. You're going to go there. You're not going to know everything, but there's a lot more fun in the unexpected, So
Yeah.
it's really,
Well,
it's
but like
just,
traveling too, like I felt like when I do plan everything out and say I do everything I wanted to do, I just find that the time just goes by so quickly because I'm just going off a checklist essentially.
Yeah.
And I wasn't living in the moment at all. And it's just like, oh, I'm back in South Florida now. Great place I hate the most.
Yeah, it's important to do enough planning to give yourself a direction in which to point yourself. But once you start moving in that direction, don't worry about where you're going or what you're going to do. Just let the world around you inform the experience and live in that moment. Don't worry too much about, I've got to be here or I got to do this, because then you're too worried about the future and you're not exploring the present.
Definitely.
Exactly. And that kind of, when you think about that in the short term, it's not really just a short-term philosophy. I mean, if you're able to apply that more to life in general, that sort of mindset,
yes,
it alleviates a lot of the suffering, from the expectation.
And there's a lot of stuff that we discover in our lives that we didn't even know we'd be interested in. We didn't, because you don't know everything. So how can you have an informed decision about what the greatest thing for me to do with my life is without knowing all of the options? And since you don't know that, yes, pick something that you like in the moment and head towards it, but always be aware of new opportunities that may arise, new interests that may come up, new passions that you may discover. Because if you're so focused on this idealized passion distantly in the future, you're going to miss all of the ones that might be even better.
Oh,
Definitely.
man, so true. So true.
Yeah. That's really why I like touring a lot, is it's kind of like extreme road tripping and also like speed dating cities, but you're just kind of going with the flow. Sometimes you forget where you are, what day of the week it is, and you're just like, okay, we're on Broadway now and doing karaoke in Nashville. And it's just like bizarre things like that just like come out of nowhere with like the group pretty much.
Traveling in a band. I mean, honestly, it's just like it does have its stress because you got to be at like the sound check, right? And you want to be like good. You want to be the you don't want to be.
You don't want to get
guys.
too drunk to play.
So you got that, but then there's always just this. Since you're on the road, there's just all these like fun little surprises.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect analogy. And I think it's really important to talk about and recognize that when you're not in like a big life change, because it'll make that easier when it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have the skills rather than sort of like getting hit with like, oh yeah, people die, like things change. And I was not ready for that. I think that. And actually, maybe that's a good way to kind of talk about the sort of depression and like suicidal ideation and self-harm sort of aspect of that, because I was gonna kind of sort of a little bit softball it and say, there's ask about the association between self-harm and depression with Goth and where that kind of fits in. But I think we could talk maybe about more personal experiences and what that was like, and then sort of maybe talk about what advice we would have.
So this band's pretty much not based, but it was formed after I was institutionalized for attempted suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So in Florida, we have something called the Baker Act, which essentially I told some friends that I was killing myself, goodbye, I love you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, laying on my bed, cops are in my room, and it's like, I think like 11 a.m. And they're telling me that they heard that I was trying to like self-harm or commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh no, that's nothing. They're just crazy. Talking about my friends, and one of the cops just looks at my arm and just sees this completely lacerated open, and they institutionalized me, which honestly, I'm not really pro any sort of authoritative intervention by the state.
Yeah.
But that did save my life and did help me grow out of that.
Yeah.
Since then, I still have my moments of like extreme depression. When that starts to happen, that's usually when I'll seek out like a psychiatrist and a therapist and try and get back on Prozac or something like that, and then wean off of it again once my brain seems to be operating properly.
Right.
But yeah, there is. I mean, I remember like one of my therapists was telling me that when I was having an episode, like maybe not listen to goth music so much, like maybe not listen to like the Smiths or the Cure, find happier things to listen to, which to me sounded crazy because like so I guess I just kind of went a little more new wave to fill that in, or like cheesy hair metal or something. But so I do feel like maybe there is an influence with the media consumption. I mean, we sing about suicide a lot and people dying, so that might draw like a certain reaction from more impressionable minds that are like younger. That is if we had a younger fan base. But I really don't know like what the answer is, because I do find like catharsis also in like kind of like more darker music and kind of like as an outlet, especially like songwriting. When I'm having a bad moment, that's when I really like to write songs.
Well, it's the same as
creative table.
It's the same as like TV shows or stuff. There's certain TV shows, like I had to stop watching The Last of Us season 2 because I was like, I felt myself like I'm not in a good place and this is making it worse.
An episode?
So yeah, I mean, I have played the game.
Yeah.
But I watched and I was like, why am I putting myself through this again right now?
Yeah. It
not a good time.
It gets pretty dark. Yeah. I
don't want to spoil, so you can cut out, but I didn't like it. I didn't play the game, so.
Oh, okay. It gets worse from there. It only gets worse. No. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
We have media like It's Always Sunny, where like all these characters are terrible people and you want to see their own kind of disaster plan blow up in their face. But then you kind of have these other medias where pretty much any Pixar movie, I guess, where it's teaching kids existential dread and characters die off. And it's, I get that completely.
Yeah.
It's a hard one with the like the really lighthearted stuff. I mean, I'm probably just damaged goods, honestly, but some of it makes me cringe so much that like I can't sometimes. Like I want to, and it's hard. I'm like, like it's too much. But like I feel, because I could see how like listening to dark music can maybe reinforce like darker thoughts in some people, right? For me, I don't know. I just like I love the art of it so much that it doesn't really do it so much. Like it doesn't do that to me. It is more cathartic, and it's nice to be okay in the mood, but still. I don't know. I never feel like it totally brings me down. For me, the best medicine, honestly, is like going out into nature, honestly.
Yeah.
That really helps.
Hard to do now that we're all like slaves to our computer desk.
I know. Tell me about it. That sort of future is kind of, it's a little freaky. That's why like Miami is well, I mean, you guys live in a big city too, so like it's hard, but I guess it's not that bad, right? You can still drive out a bit and be in some nature, right? Like if you drive south, you guys are in some nature there.
Illinois got really.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of nature around here. Not a lot of the sort of magnificent grand scale nature unless you get pretty far away. But I mean, Chicago itself is a fairly green city, surprisingly so for a lot of people who haven't been here. There's a lot
Hashtag
of parks.
420. Sorry.
A lot of parks, a lot of green space, even within the urban centers as well. They did a pretty good job of beautifying the city and adding in nature over the last probably 30, 40 years. I think they've really focused on it. But we've got some good gardens. I mean, heck, one of our main cemeteries is a cemetery and arboretum.
I miss Chicago.
it's great. So there's plenty to see here nature-wise. There's definitely the ability to get out. And I know that I wish I got out more often, and it's nothing to do with where I live. It's all just my will. I come home and I'm tired and I want the quick dopamine hit of getting something quick and easy on the computer, not the slow burn enjoyment that is going out and walking through a forest or seeing a nice garden. It's just, it's not as immediate.
So that's one thing that I agree with Missy. Like, there's a lot of things about Miami that upset me, and I'm are annoying.
Everglades is nice,
but then we take for granted the fact that, like, because just this weekend, right? It was really nice going to the beach and just being in the water. It reset my whole mood, just like soaking in, getting some sunlight, being out in the water. Like, it was hilarious because I hadn't gone to the beach in a little while, so I took my docs like a proper goth would to the beach. But like, man, just like being out like that, it's so nice. So however you can do that, I always recommend that. I feel like it does change your mood,
I actually suggest the opposite too. Someone once told me when I was having a bout of depression, just play video games. It's like the new modern age meditation, and that really did help.
Depends what video game, I guess, but
That's true too.
I mean, like, yeah, to both of your points, I think it's definitely worse now because we have corporations that are like Meta. I just saw an article about Meta selling AI companionship, which is just further atomizing people, and sort of like, that's, Missy, you're talking about how important it is that Goth has a built-in community where you can congregate and get connection and support, but it's hard to go out and heal that way because, well, first there's that personal responsibility slogan of capitalism, but we're drowning in work. We're struggling to figure out health insurance forms and medical debt and taxes and like these bureaucracy things. We're being dehumanized at work. Yeah. We're struggling for our rent, and we're monetizing our personal hobbies, and you have these superficial appearances of support through like mental health awareness and these online connections and like gamifying everything. But I think it just sort of all works to continue that suffering and like exploitation from corporations so that you're so tired that you can't, so that we're killing ourselves instead of them killing us. We're constantly dysregulated and stressed, and
I hope there's some good, right? And everything, there's always some good and bad, right? Like, from the AI side, right? Like having something that would just clean up the room, like mundane tasks, things that maybe you don't want to trouble yourself with. Hey, actually, can you balance my budget? Can you do that math for me? Because I suck at that. Those are, I see the positive ones, right?
It won't be used like that.
No, I know, but no, for sure, it's going to be used for everything. But then the darker side to me, which is the weirder side, is when it gets into the relationship side. Yeah, like your companion, this person to talk to. Like, damn, that one is sad. That one is sad. And I really hope that in the future, the need will be to go back to like person to person, like that we will like remember, like, man, no, it is better kind of just hanging out with another human, right?
Yeah.
Because, man, if we export our
can't have an orgy
humanity,
with an AI.
about orgy.
I mean,
I think
Trey,
of that
you know
movie
something I
Her. Have you guys seen that movie Her?
Yeah.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen it,
With the
but I know
actor
it.
from The Boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Joaquin Phoenix, and it's like this. He's having a relationship with an AI,
Yeah.
and he's really connected with this AI, and they're bonding. They keep bonding and bonding, and they're like, "Oh wow, like this AI like knows everything about me." I think the AI is like Sofia Vergara or something like that, right? And so it's like something like
what's
that.
her
I can't
name?
remember. I might
forget.
be messing
Yeah.
that part up. But anyhow,
Doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. That part of it doesn't matter. What gets interesting about it is that in time, he starts getting jealous with the AI because he's realizing that the AI is not just talking to him, it's talking to all these other people at the same time. And it's like, wait. Like, how many people are you talking to? You know? And then at one point in the movie, the AI is like, yeah, I'm talking to like 20,000 other people at the same time, like doing this, like, so they're basically like in a super polyamorous relationship with like 20,000 other people. And then it gets even crazier. And then the knowledge of that like crushes them, right? And then it gets even crazier because it gets to a point where the AI is kind of like bored of talking to us and just wants to talk
That's right.
with other AI, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was a pretty, I don't know, that something like that could happen. I don't know. That's crazy, you know?
Also, something too more like immediate as well is just kind of within like kind of this new sphere of like technological capitalism is just like in the social media, say like Facebook, where it's just getting people to argue with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole premise of pretty much posts now on Facebook is just how many boomers can you get to yell at each other, essentially.
Well, I mean, that's a technique as old as time. Sorry, Trey, go ahead.
I was going to say that's the shift in capitalism and monetization. We used to be consume. You got to get product out that people will buy and buy and buy. And now it's less about making us buy things, at least not directly, and it's more about controlling our attention, where we're focusing, what we're doing. It's in support of buying things in theory because the attention economy is valuable because it allows advertisers to advertise to you. But Zuckerberg and Bezos don't care about that as much. Well, okay, Bezos does, but don't care about it as much. I mean, they're getting money from that, but really their goal is to get you to pay attention and be in their space, in their control. And that's the main thing, is they're focusing us on a specific community that's being artificial created to capture us and prevent us from looking outside of that thing, because we can't be monetized if we're looking elsewhere.
Definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, a big part of that too is just the control of. It's the same reason why they say, "Oh, you should be afraid of people coming over the border," because if we are fighting ourselves, then we're not organizing and making, fighting the systems that are actually causing issues. I noticed, like on YouTube, there's a big industry for shitting on different fandoms and things. And in one way, it's us sort of trying to have some sense of control. Like, I can't control anything else, so it's easy to punch down and make fun of somebody else. But also, I think the systems are built like that so that they are pointing to, like, these are the things you're different on, and this is why you should hate somebody else for their differences, so that you're not actually thinking about the system that is causing you all your problems. You're thinking it's the other poor person that's causing all your problems.
Yeah. But
it's just like the transgender scapegoat too, and how that's been like commodified for like the only like that, and I guess like the border is like the only right talking point that they have, and it's just really like a nothing burger essentially.
Yeah.
That they're blowing up out of proportion, and then you see common people that aren't really like politicized at all getting roped into that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hope for aliens so that we can realize how much more similar we are than different.
Yeah, an external foe that is different enough that allows us to see our own commonality rather than just picking apart our
billionaires. They're fucking
differences.
Aliens.
They are.
I do love a good anal probing, though. I will say that.
Rock and roll.
I got it in.
You got it in.
Yeah. So depression. Huh?
Everybody drink.
Everybody drink. Yeah.
Already am.
I've completely lost the plot now. No,
we're talking about depression.
Yeah, this is relevant to like the death conversation. So like I'm pretty familiar with depression and self-harm, mostly through my wife, who has been like chronically depressed for about 12 years. That's not a static thing, right? Like you were saying, Missy, it's good days, bad days, that kind of thing. But I have seen her go through like losing all sense of joy, or being able to have a sense of purpose, or find happiness in the things she normally does. And she's, attempted suicide several times. And those are, not stories I'm going to tell here. Those are her stories. But I've had some experience with depression myself as well, just sort of like fairly minor self-harm things. More going back to the control issue kind of stuff, like trying to have some control over these emotions or the pain of depression. But I learned that I like that this is a conversation we have in Goth, because I think the way that people talk about depression, I think, is problematic, especially coming from people who haven't experienced depression, because it was very different for me watching my wife go through something compared to actually feeling that hopelessness or that void. Like I can listen to Lacan talk about the real, which is like a way that I sort of understand that emptiness and that kind of black hole. But it's a whole different thing to experience that yourself. And for me, once I can sort of, if I talk about it enough, I can kind of feel the edges of that despair. And it's something that actually really scares me. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who have killed themselves, because, and I've gotten in trouble with like friends, and I'm not advocating suicide, obviously. I think, there is help. There are ways that you can, alternative ways you can live to get better and feel better, and you should definitely reach out. But I don't like the tropes of the like the giving up, or it's weakness, or like how you might make other people feel, because there's so many nuances of depression you don't understand when you're not in it, when you look at your life and you can only see like an endless timeline of suffering. Those sorts of conversations don't help, especially when it comes from like a religious sentiment, like the sort of like sanctity of life thing, or how, saying, oh, well, it's going to make other people feel bad. Like, I feel bad right now. That doesn't, you want me to continue to feel bad so that you don't feel bad, is what that sounds like. And so I actually grabbed a quote from my friend Sanctus Manium from a post they made on in 2022, and because it really spoke to me and sort of framed this in a way that made sense to me, that I don't think a lot of people understand unless they've been there. So I just wanted to read this real quick. They said, I will never hold resentment for those who took their own lives. I have nothing but love and empathy and compassion for them. I don't care if you think it's selfish. Being selfish isn't inherently bad anyway. I've lost many people to suicide, and I've tried taking my own life many times in a variety of different ways. I understand their need, not want, to die. It's a need that gnaws on you constantly, like an itch you can't scratch, especially for someone like me who's been obsessed with and fetishizes their own death to the point that certain doctors think it's a neurosis or obsession of some sort. A neurosis seems way too light, though. I understand it hurt and is often bewildering when someone you love chooses to die, but I implore you to try and be compassionate rather than resentful. I promise it will feel a lot better.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I don't really necessarily view not advocating for, but even when I go through my phases and am suicidal, I feel like that's really the only time and such like an overwhelming like pain, like mentally and internally, that I have control is having that option.
Yeah.
And that's stuff I've talked about at length too with my therapist in the past. And it is kind of, my anthropology background, kind of, some cultures do value the action of suicide and don't frown upon it.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not advocating for it, but it is like a whole emotional whirlwind that a lot of people, I don't think, understand what it's like to be at that breaking point.
Yeah, it's not a black and white thing. Like, not to say that sounds bad.
It's very gray though.
It's
like
very
it is
nuanced.
very gray. Like, and that's how it feels. It feels gray. That overwhelming like gray feeling you get like in your mind is exactly kind of like the overwhelming like burden.
Yeah.
Like all the colors sucked out around you, pretty much.
Yeah. There's a really good video on this, actually. I'll try and throw this in the show notes. I will throw this in the show notes. There's an older video that, who was it? Philosophy Tube did. And I think it really cut through the ways that we generally in culture talk about suicide in a very non-empathetic, non-understanding way, and also in a very morally black and white way. Like suicide is wrong kind of thing. And it's like
also seen very like if you're a masculine man, you wouldn't even consider suicide. That's kind of like in the like cultural zeitgeist
for sure.
that we experience. And it's kind of frowned upon. Like you're less of a man if you're depressed or suicidal or you go to therapy. Like that's something I've noticed now with like the younger generation is they're very openly talking about how they need to talk to a therapist. Where like when I was younger, that was a very like hush hush sort of
taboo.
thing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think that's a kind of positive that it's being addressed more. I'm not sure what really was the cause behind that. If it's just kind of more of like Gen Xers having kids, or if it's more just generally what's been going on with like school shootings and things like that, and kind of
the horrors
mental health
of the
awareness.
world. Yeah.
And another thing another comment that I guess, because I personally, maybe I haven't struggled with more of like the clinical kind of like depression of like maybe like from an imbalance of some sort, like chemically in the brain or, something to that. Because that I have sympathy for people that experience that, because it's like living with like a severe back pain or something that it's just like constantly it's there and that's a hard one to deal with. And I just think that like one thing to think about with suicide is like, even if you think that you're not going to affect others by that action, you really will. Like others will. There's people out there that are going to miss you, that are going to care for you. It's unfortunate that it's like, I didn't say it before, but yeah, my mom took her own life, and like that was so difficult for me to deal with. I mean, it's hard, like to you do pass that sort of pain on, and I think it's kind of better to think like how can you, if you're going to pass away, how can you at least leave like a more positive feeling out there for others is a better way to try to live your life, just try to think of like, man, let me just work towards like leaving others with something good, because it's a hard topic, this one, because there's just so many ways to deal with it. I just think that really explore options like meditation, I think, is another thing that, again, we don't really do in Western culture. we're like so blocked off from it.
Yeah.
And kind of
our minds are constantly go, go, go.
They're constantly go. And this topic that we were talking about earlier about expectations, and like we get so trapped in a headspace that I do think that we don't have the proper tools. We've lost some of these tools. Like I really think meditation is one of those tools that can help pull yourself out of your own body. And
yeah.
And I do hope that somebody who's struggling with depression really give that a fair shake, because it's hard, because we have so many distractions, and I just feel like that's increasing. But maybe a way to pull yourself out of your body, because your body gets you to do, like, that's what addiction kind of does to you too. It's like you're addicted to something.
I feel goes hand in hand with like that kind of like self-medicating. It's like a spiral pretty much. So once you like, and speaking from experience here, I probably still am in that loop.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you know, once you go down that, like, get into that, then that like kind of just like reinforces that like loss of serotonin and that chase, and then now you're hanging out with really shady people. From my experience anyways.
Sure,
and it's like this, where am I right now? What am I doing?
Right.
Who am I surrounded by?
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, to both of your points, it's very personal. It's very contextual. For my wife, one of the big triggers for her depression is just her chronic illness and poverty, and the fact that we don't have good systems in place to support people who are going through financial distress or medical distress, and just get put into endlessly suffering and not having the support and the community groups and that kind of thing. Having those systems in place would make a huge difference, I think. Those kind of social safety nets and just kindness.
So general hierarchy of needs being covered would probably help a lot overall.
The
social through economics is just already like pressure, and you have this false sense of meritocracy in the U.S., which will never happen. You're born working class, you're going to be working class. That's it.
I'll say this: I have had this unique perspective of an ex-partner of mine, right? So she lived in her family was from Nicaragua, and I went to meet her family in Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
Very poor, very, very poor. Like so shockingly poor that when I first got there, I kind of associated like that level of poverty with crime. Like, oh man, this is dangerous. Like, then I stayed there for a while. Like I went for a couple weeks, and after a while, it really dawned on me, like, even if you're poor and you don't really have much, like, those people have a community. Like, the little town that they lived in was all interconnected. People talked to each other. People knew each other. I don't know that you could totally be depressed in a corner somewhere. Like, somebody's gonna like recognize you and talk to you. It was so crazy. Like, you could go to the neighbor there and you could buy food. One person's making tortillas here. This other person's boiling chicken over here. This other person doing this over here. They're totally poor, but they have each other, like, in a way like that. They know their neighbors. Like, the little kids are out playing. Like, everybody. It's crazy. And then when you come back to the United States, you realize, man, we really have lost our humanity, like, in a lot of ways. Like, we're so, like, I just think of so many living situations I've had. I don't even know my neighbor, really, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. I was going to say, you'll see this like sociology a lot though too, is like when you have income inequality. So like generally areas that are all poor completely, low crime rate, it's when you have like a small rich area, and then like a massive poor population. And that's when you start to see kind of that like disconnect socially. which I always thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
So like high impoverished areas that you see that are surrounded with poverty, you'll have lower crime because there is like a better sense of community. But then when you have that like kind of social disparity between classes, that's when you really start to see like splinter groups and then like crime syndicates and all that other sort of fun stuff develop.
Yeah, I think
fun stuff as in not so fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I think everybody's material needs should be met, especially in the amount of wealth that's in the world. There's no real excuse for that. But I do think that, interestingly, your experience there kind of puts the light to the common line about like, oh, communism could never work because everyone is inherently selfish. And it's like, well, I think that's just a really good description of the rich people, because I do think that happens in America. And like, so if there's like a storm and a bunch of trees blow over or something, everyone will kind of come out, and I've seen this happen. People will come out and they'll be like helping. Somebody has a chainsaw. They're helping like get trees off of somebody's car. Like, people want to help each other, but we have such a culture here that I think is driven by capitalism to be cutthroat and to be disconnected, that we have both not our material needs met and we don't talk to each other. And that is why I think even though Goths tend to be more introverted and kind of don't go out of their way to talk to people and are kind of like, I know I'm very anxious or even agoraphobic sometimes, the world is built to or at least our culture is built to exacerbate those issues. And I think we really need to try and take advantage of the community that we have built in. I mean, also both this kind of personal things we're talking about with therapy, or spending some way to deconstruct your barriers to being anxious, or even any sort of like internalized bigotry you might have, because that is also a social thing, because the things that you're carrying with you leak out into your community and the people around you. So it is beneficial to decolonize and like do those sorts of things. But I really think we culturally need to like recognize the value we have of these built-in communities in Goth, like all over the place, and take advantage of that.
No, and I'll say on that point, I love, and this transcends just like Goth communities, like as far as like a music scene and stuff, because I love there, this venue that I briefly mentioned, Churchill's. It was like kind of our headquarters of the music scene. It closed down after COVID, but it was awesome to just like, it could be metalheads, it could be goths, but a lot of people wearing like black, and almost like a community of people that like, it just felt good. Alternative genres, yeah, and just going there and being part of that community. And then when you tour, it's so funny because you already know that you're getting close to like other people that might be going to your show or like a scene, because you see all these people like dressed in black, kind of like, and it's so funny how it transcends genres. And it's like it becomes like a community of people. So I always say, go to shows and you're gonna meet like you're gonna find the people that you really love when you're doing something that you find joy in, and that's just like in the most simplistic way how like communities form, so
definitely,
don't
it's
just
like a tribal ritual gathering essentially.
Yeah, it really is, and it's just so cool, like we really had that here. Like, it was so cool how like this one venue was like the melting pot of all these genres. So I found a lot of community in music because that's what I'm passionate about. And it's just awesome, all the friendships that have sprouted out of that. Just like me and Missy as friends, like sprouted out of that. Other great friendships, those are motivating things in life, so don't just watch the music online, go to the shows. It's going to be good, especially in this world of like people like increasingly meeting each other online. Like, go to a show. Trust me, you're going to meet some cool people in person. you know. Um, and yeah, and if you keep going to shows, eventually you're going to notice, damn, I can be a part of this community. I could feel like I belong here, you know. And that's the neat thing about like punk music too, is it's always been like on the musical side of things, like easier to get into. So you're not judged so much if like, okay, I don't really know how to play the guitar or bass or whatever, or the synth too well, but or whatever instrument it's going to be, but like I'm going to do it, you know, for the love of the game, you know, and eventually you're going to get good at it. You know, that sort of like that community, like, you know, because I can speak to this because this is what a community that I definitely, it's become like, we used to call Churchill's church, you know, like we would refer to it like, hey, you going to church?
That's where I met our current drummer, is at Churchill's back in the day when it was around, so.
And that resonated so much because it was like, yeah, in the absence of us going to a church in like past, you know, like society, like civilizations, where this has become our new church, this music scene, this community. It's a beautiful thing, and I feel like it's an uplifting thing too, you know?
Yeah. I wanted to switch gears for a second, so everyone take a deep breath. But for me, this podcast is about social structures to a large degree. And I'm very interested in social theory. I love to talk about how and why communities form. Missy, I have heard you have an anthropology background. I haven't really studied anthropology specifically. I wanted to ask what your anthropology background is, but also if that has impacted the way that you see or understand goth culture.
Oh, it definitely has. My background is actually, I triple majored at Florida International University.
Wow.
I currently work in archaeology. I triple majored in anthropology, sociology, and geography. So pretty much all kind of like sister subfields of each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I definitely like am constantly doing mental ethnographies in my head on various subcultures and how they interact. So like with the goth scene in particular, I notice it's very LGBTQ and very femme dominant.
Yeah.
Those are some things. Also, I would say mostly like openly leftist. Some of it is kind of like out of political spectrum, I would say, or not aware of political spectrum.
Or libertarian.
You got those up there?
There's a few. Yeah.
Down here it might just be kind of like people that aren't in the know, so they'll still, I don't want to say this band's name, but there's a few people that still support that one band with the Sons of the Confederacy in it.
Oh yeah. Dickheads. That whole label is on fire right now.
Yeah, I saw with Kanye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeez.
So glad we never signed to them, at least. There was a moment we were trying to. But yeah, so I remember like the goth scene like 10 years ago, or a little bit further back even, probably like 15 years ago. It was more not really goth, I feel. It was kind of like this fetish and industrial crossover thing going on at the time. A lot of gravers. And I remember kind of, I guess, with like the post-punk revival, kind of like we brought about like kind of like the trad goth, if you would. And I'm kind of happy to see that's kind of like in a lot of the cities we play, that seems to kind of be the look now. A lot of teased hair. The makeup style is very Susie Sue. Not saying that like everyone needs to white their face or anything like that, because I think there's kind of a lot of like, my favorite goth aesthetic is kind of the DIY approach.
Yeah.
Going to a thrift store and just grabbing a bunch of stuff and just making a mess out of it. I'm really into that personally. kind of like the vulture culture aspects of taking
Right.
dead animals and using them to like make jewelry out of. I think that's really cool
Right,
too
yeah.
and creative. So you see a lot of that in the punk scene. You see a lot of that too. Unfortunately, in the Miami punk scene, it's gotten really bizarre because it was such a low entry point, and you do have a lot of like kind of conservative families, kids now coming of age, and I feel like that's kind of been bombarded with like um, a right wing like insurgency essentially down here,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it's very depressing to see that. I haven't seen that outside of Miami, luckily, but to me that's been very bizarre. The metal scene down here is kind of like split in two, so you kind of have like your meat-headed metal, and then you have like your more sophisticated metal, like Ryan does with his band Bleeth, which is
Mhm.
kind of more of like a metal hipster crowd. Yeah, it's kind of like all the different like subcultures down here. Goth, I would say, is probably my favorite subculture I've been a part of. When I was in folk punk, I would say that was more left leaning. However, unfortunately, a lot of the people I've met back then have died because that had its own kind of like subculture of drugs, specifically like heroin
Right.
and train hopping, stuff like that, being a traveler.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I did think it was really interesting when you brought up that there's that like capitalist argument of like we're an individualistic species, so selfish is good. I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting because that is very inaccurate, and that's usually citing Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, which is
Yeah.
not about that at all. It's actually about altruism and how humans are altruistic and how that like developed through like biological diversity.
Evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of, and I
Yeah, of
remember reading that, and there was like a footnote there. I shouldn't have named the book this because it was championed by like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan,
course.
Oh,
It,
kind of like your hyper capitalists.
it happens, but
And granted, it's a
okay.
very nerdy read, so it's hard to read. So these people, I'm pretty sure, weren't reading it. They're just pointing to the title of it. So,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. They're coming away with it with the wrong outlook.
yeah,
But
that's
no, the
like
selfish
how
gene is awesome.
it reminds me how Stoicism was sort of hijacked by tech bros and misrepresented.
oh, definitely.
hmm
Um,
hmm
yeah, in a similar way.
Kind of like the Roman Empire on the right too is very like romanticized, but it's like not talking about the peak of the empire, which is under Trajan, I believe, which was more embracing of like the diversity through conquest
Mm,
and bringing in the other cultures that were conquered and letting them like express themselves within Rome.
okay. Yeah. I guess so. I was like, well, what do I have to add to this? I only have one real reference for any sociologist, any anthropologist, and that's Bruno Latour, who's somebody I really like. So I had a little thought about how that kind of impacted the way I look at goth. He has this
They're network, right?
yeah, actor network theory, but he also talks about this idea of how we have never been modern and sort of how like modernity as a concept is this kind of partly a belief that we have this linear uniform development and that just builds over time. And I see this concept kind of show up in goth YouTube videos when people talk about being afraid of goth evolving beyond its roots. I think that's kind of a modernist concept. And the way that the way that I see this, and I know people don't agree with me a lot, but that's fine, is that like what Latour would say is that goth has never been a uniform or universal concept. It's never been one core set of meanings that's consistent across time and place, but it's a dynamic, fluid set of meanings that change as they interact in the world, and people and objects interact and move and shift in temporality and space. So the fear that like goth is going to become something unrecognizable doesn't have to be a fear, because as long as you are enacting or playing out the values and the qualities of goth that you think are important, then it isn't disappearing. It is, because there are many expressions of goth. And so it's like this idea of culture functioning as a process that is embedded or interacting with nature and science and politics. It's not like this thing that's distinct from all these different domains. It's that network of like shifting dynamic interactions. And I like that a lot, because, and then he also talks about sort of like doing anthropology in a way that restores dignity to pre-modern people, because when you have these modernist timelines, you get these like ancient alien theories that, because it's like, oh well, people back then couldn't have been smart enough to build pyramids, you know. It's like
just racism on it.
Yeah. So but it's like it ignores that, like, it's contextual, because we've had libraries that were destroyed and we don't have that information. There's natural disasters that happen and all these little pockets of things. So that's my only that's my
with goth too. So I wasn't really around for like the Batcave. I'm not old enough, so I don't really know when the word was officially coined. I know, like, reading various books, it was I know Andy Sexgang claimed credit for being called it, and then I know like Bauhaus with Bela Lugosi's Dead. Then you go back to the Doors, even the first time it's actually in print that you could prove. But goth itself, say it is from Bela Lugosi's Dead. They're making a dub song, so music itself is constantly changing and diffusing culturally. It's exchanging and developing and growing. It's not a static concept. And it hasn't really been since, like, an instrument gets introduced in Appalachia, like a banjo from West Africa, and then you have a whole genre of bluegrass that develops. So with like music, you constantly see shifts. I get the idea of protecting, and in a sense, I am for gatekeeping, I guess, like the political ideology of the goth scene, mainly because I don't want to see it become destroyed by bands like Neo-Confederate Adventurer Team. I'll call them that. But that's, like, music is always like liquid. It always has been liquid. It's always changing. It's always developing. A lot of the bands that do a lot of good for the scene, I remember in DC, Cemetery Sex was a band we met, and they would definitely not be considered trad goth by like a lot of people. They incorporate a lot of like metal elements in it, and I know metal's kind of like the boogeyman of like any like punk sub shoot off genre. So overall, I think people take inspiration from different things, and people shouldn't, like, also artists, I don't think should pigeonhole themselves to like a genre concept, even though I know personally that's very hard to go against.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, even in the past, in classical music, there was probably times where we didn't have the word goth yet, but there was like music
the songs in a minor key.
A minor key, or like, I think it's like what is it, the augmented fourth or something, like this evil.
Oh, you're the diminished chord?
Yeah, those diminished chords that, like, they were like, there was times where they were like bands in like Renaissance like era, like especially in church music. Like, no, don't play that. That's like
rock
music
in general has everything to owe to really blues music and gospel. Like, even like the whole chorus structure, chorus structure is very gospel based, with kind of like the gang chants and stuff like that.
I love Cemetery Sex, by the way. We had Anastasia on the show before. But and to your point too, I wouldn't say like, oh well, there's no reason to advocate for what you think goth should be, because it's just whatever. It's this amorphous thing. I think that's the whole thing. Is I think it's actually more empowering thinking about it that way, because acting in the world in the way that you want to the world to be does change things, and it does like shift culture in that way, that it does have an impact. It's not just like, I'm just doing something that only affects me. So yeah, I'm definitely agree with that idea of like gatekeeping or sort of saying, like, talking about what you think community and culture should be and why and that kind of thing. Obviously, I mean, I have a whole fucking podcast about it, but all right. Well, any final thoughts before we get into like where people can find you online?
No, it's just been a pleasure being on here. Listened to you for a while now, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. Honestly, I never would have thought we would have gone down all these heady spaces. So it's great to tackle kind of all elements of goth, really, you know. It's thank you for having us on, because it's a unique perspective. I don't really think I've personally listened to a podcast that would go into this depth, you know, on this subject. So
that means a lot. I appreciate that. I've really enjoyed being able to hear both of your thought processes. Like, that's been, for me, that was really insightful and wonderful experience. But let me know where we can find your band, if any others, like side projects, solo things you got going on. I'll put those in the show notes as well.
Okay. Yeah, you can find us on our website, obsidian.band, where we have a whole link tree and all our Spotify links and Bandcamp and all that fun stuff. Again, it's obsidian.band. And then I know Ryan's in another band.
Yeah. Definitely go and check out all the stuff with Obsidian. If you can find us live, definitely do that. I'm also in like another band that we I don't want to say what genre. It's heavy music because it shifts. It shifts as the waters shift as we change. But it's Bleef_band on Instagram, and we have a link tree there where you can check out all of our stuff. We're about to release our album Marionette through there. Okay. So check that out if you like heavier music. I would say, just in general, also just support your local scene. Like, go to shows, like, be delightfully surprised. There could be somebody out there that maybe they don't have the like right Spotify numbers, but damn, when you see them live, you're going to be impressed, you know? Yeah. So do that. I always encourage people to do that. A lot of people, for whatever reason, they just, they don't, you might not quite realize what's like right there, right next to you. You know, you might be going to only dishing out the cash for the big bands, but there might be a band that's equally as good in a small little venue and you're going to be more intimate with them. So, go to shows.
Definitely. And in the Chicago area, I'd say Iron Years and, of course, Bellwether Syndicate. And then Club Drugs, I remember seeing and being wowed by when we played with them.
Hell yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I'm actually wearing their shirt right now.
Oh, fantastic. I had a few random disconnected thoughts about, I guess, everything.
Okay.
Both the mental health side of things, the dealing with death side of things, sort of like identity and all that kind of stuff. I have a quote I pulled from Karen Barad. I was going to read. Oh, I should turn that off. One of the more recent thoughts I had, I'm working backwards in chronological order of my musings about this, is the concept of what a good life is, or what a life worth living is.
Okay.
The Philosophy Tube video I mentioned previously has a good example in there. So the video itself is kind of exploring what it would mean if we accepted that people are able to rationally choose to kill themselves, rather than just assuming it's kind of a medical dysfunction. And so that's a whole different topic I didn't want to go into. But in the video, the example of Jehovah's Witnesses who believe that they should not get blood transfusions is used, because the thought process there is like, well, most people agree you should be able to choose what medical procedures you do or don't want. But then you run into situations where maybe you have a child who isn't old enough to make their own decision yet. And how do you arbitrate that? So I guess in England, the high courts there ruled that doctors can provide a blood transfusion against the parent's wishes if it's deemed medically necessary. But within that medically necessary clause is a moral and a political decision as well. Or I was thinking like maybe vaccines are another example when you're talking about the value we place on medical science or social responsibility or individual choice.
Sure. You've got the living will situations as well.
Yeah.
The my desire to, if I get to a certain point, pull the plug rather than keep me quote unquote living indefinitely.
Right. And so but then it's the question around like how much autonomy does that person get to decide, right? You know, when you have physician assisted suicide, it's under the guise of the person has to be able to make the decision. They have to be mentally sound, whatever that means. And there's embedded in that is a kind of moral or ethical judgment. And I thought this is a good example of Latour's argument against modernism, because you don't have these distinct clean divisions between political, moral, social, nature, science, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So when you get into the question of like, is my life worth living? In that question, it's not in a vacuum. It's obviously a complicated question, but then often there's like some authority figure or system that's involved in framing the question, and like a mental health provider, something like that. And as we know, those systems are not set up to empathize or empower marginalized community. So like even assuming a mental health practitioner has the patient's best interest in mind and aren't in there either like on a power trip or have like this self-righteous perspective that they have the most true version of what a healthy life looks like or whatever, should they be able to say for another person what a meaningful life is for someone else? How do you decide what a wasted life is? Like that's sort of gets into dehumanizing kind of things, like when we talk about homeless people or whatever, that kind of thing. And a lot of the time, what a worthwhile life is embedded in capitalist notions of producing being tied to worth. Sarah's kind of going through that now with disability applications when she had to see a couple different doctors that the state assigned to assess her. They asked a bunch of questions that weren't really relevant to the way that she is disabled or how her life is impacted. And even one of them even sort of was implying to our faces that, oh, maybe you're not that disabled or you're not disabled enough or you're kind of faking it or whatever.
Okay.
I think for me, it just made me think about like, what lessons do I have to learn about the way I treat other people and take care of people? And how do we respect what someone finds their happiness in? You might think, well, if your kid's playing video games, people would say, oh, they're wasting their time playing video games instead of playing on a soccer team or learning an instrument or studying for math or whatever. And those kind of go hand in hand with like how we sort of judge what is and isn't a worthy way of spending your time. And I just sort of thought conceptually it's interesting thinking about the way that everything is entangled with the, again, political, social, ethical framework. You have insurance panels involved in that and laws and social pressures and social perspectives that are going to vary from place to place. There's a lot of embedded value judgments in those conversations and those value judgments come out of these different frameworks, whether they're epistemic frameworks or whatever ethical frameworks about how we think we know what we know or how we decide what should be right and what should be wrong. And just sort of to that systemic thing and speaking to the way that like certain groups get called primitive or delusional or deviant because we're imposing our ontology onto other communities' ontologies as like this is the superior sort of way of thinking about this, which is something that Latour talks about as well. So you get another comment in that video was just that like in the UK, I guess if you get caught trying to commit suicide, you can be arrested or locked up against your will, like an inpatient kind of thing. And that has a whole other sort of, Missy had a good experience, and I have heard lots of good things come out of that, but I've also heard bad things come out of that. And so I think it's worth just thinking about the way that we treat other people who are going through things that we don't understand, and sort of thinking about why we're treating them that way, why we think we know better.
Yeah.
So that's one sort of thought. I guess it doesn't really answer the what is a life worth living, but it's just more analyzing the question rather than trying to find an answer.
Right. To be fair, that's really all we can do most of the time. I mean, humanity in general has been struggling across every culture. Most major philosophical works and religious tracts and think pieces from the dawn of time have been defining first off, trying to figure out what a life worth living is, and then how to do it is a whole nother question. So defining the meaning of life is kind of the meaning of life.
Yeah.
Constantly questioning and seeking that. And it is in the seeking, in my mind, that is the purpose and the meaning.
Yeah, I agree.
But I mean, that's not a satisfying action. It's not a satisfying answer that you can shape a life around, which is the problem with that sort of kind of pat statement. As agreeable as it might be, as insightful as it might be, you can't really then use that to plan your life, which is what makes it sort of frustrating and confounding for a lot of people. I mean, of course, there are dozens and dozens and hundreds of people who love to make a living off of dictating that pathway, that meaningful life to you. Usually supporting their own agenda. Sometimes it's just to sell that book, but sometimes it's a larger agenda about the way they want the world structured, which typically ends up giving them more power.
Yeah.
But there are also people who are simply delusional, but like to give advice too.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the hard part, is it's the whole world terrain social environment that is littered with people who are trying to convince other people their way because it helps them improve their situation, regardless of whether it helps the person they're advising.
Right.
That's beside the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a hard question to answer. It's something we're all asking all the time. And to your point about the whole, the activities, judging other people's activities, the value judgments of what certain activities are important and what aren't, a lot of that is sort of, let's look at what the oldest activities are always deemed appropriate, but the newer ones are usually deemed suspicious or actively hostile, or not hostile, but harmful. Hence the video games in modern time, hence screen time, phone use, social media, all the modern ills. But we've talked about this several times on the podcast, but that happens with every new thing is viewed as oh my God, society is collapsing. Whether it's screen time, whether it's recorded sound, whether it's writing, whether it's every time something new comes up, it's viewed as the sky is falling, and a hindrance to finding that ideal life. Because the ideal life is always this thing that we look back upon, right? It's the rosy view of history. We lionize the stories we tell of how people used to live and how people used to live lives. And that's the ideal that we always need to get back to, because the new stuff is scary and wrong. The old stuff has stood the test of time, and we've lost our way in the now. So we have to look back in the then, when we apparently still had our way. But that's always been the case, and the now has always been the problem. But then was now as well. So,
well, yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to what helps me a lot in terms of just general life satisfaction, and even, I guess, working through suicidal ideation or just depression is in terms of like self-maintenance kind of thing, is trying to identify myself with adaptation and being fluid and going with the flow, and what you were talking about before, the sort of in the episode, being present in the present moment, which is a huge hurdle for me. But I do notice that there is a noticeable reduction in my stress when I can. And again, for me, kind of going back to the Buddhist idea of no self, where just sort of seeing the self and life and the world as constant transformation. I'm not always happy. I'm not always sad. And if I think I'm sticking, or if I think I need to stick to some authentic version of myself that's somewhere inside me, some truest version, that's going to cause me suffering, because life is constant change and motion. And what I've learned is finding empowerment in sort of realizing I can I can in any moment work towards embodying the values that are important to me, and not be tied to this is just who I am, or this is who I'm supposed to be. And I think that is kind of counterintuitive to Goth in some ways, or just culture at large, to say there's no inherent unchanging self. I know, like, because the Goth label is so important to us, and there's beyond that, there's a culture of living authentically or being your truest self. But it's sort of the thing where if you're defined by being a parent or by a job or by the way you look or whatever, that thing will inevitably change. And when it does, it's going to cause suffering, because you're going to try and hold on to that, or you're going to get stuck thinking about the past, or trying to force yourself into a box that you don't necessarily feel comfortable in anymore. And so accepting there is no authentic self kind of removes that obstacle, that pain point. It's more of like a story. The true self is more of like a story we tell ourselves, or some sort of like a perception that we try to create of a cohesive, congruent identity to kind of make sense of everything. But I really do think if that it's just, we're shifting networks of interactions and material objects and assemblages of all these organisms working together to make our bodies work and make the world work. And so to me, there's no real beginning, there's no real end. These things are kind of all integrated and embedded and rely on each other to exist. And that, I think, relates to the death thing, because just as the world around us is all of these relationships and shifting contexts and everything, that which has died is also taking on new contexts and new relationships. I was thinking about this today when I was thinking about someone in the scene who just died. I don't know if I'm not going to say their name yet because it's pretty fresh.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with their family and everything like that, so I want to be respectful in that way. But I was just sort of thinking about how that for me is sort of it caused me to reach out to old friendships, old relationships, interact with current relationships.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in the scene are talking to each other and talking about that person, and they're living through our collective thought and conversations, and it spurred some meaningful meaningful conversations with my wife and with other friends, and changed some of my behaviors and some of my thoughts. And so in that way, things continue on just in different ways, and that's all. Everything is all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this quote that I pulled from Karen Barad.
Okay.
They are talking about a term they coined called intra-action, which is kind of a way of understanding interaction. Basically, Barad is arguing that the term interaction assumes pre-established entities that are engaging with each other. So like you and me having this conversation, we're discrete entities unto ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like that science-nature dichotomy or culture-politics dichotomy. But Barad's point is to deconstruct that presumption and view agency as not an inherent property that's tied to a static person or object, but as dynamic inseparability. So basically, there's no way to understand or examine me as a thing without you in this moment, or without my environment or my past history that led me to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of concept of being embedded and that kind of thing. So that's so I wanted to read this because I like it. Barad is fairly wordy, not quite word salad, but it's, it almost borders on like poetry in a way, except there's jargon and stuff in there. But I do like this sort of description, so I figured I'd read it. And if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. So they say, so even the smallest bits of matter are an enormous multitude. Each individual is made up of all possible histories and virtual interactions with all others. Indeterminacy is an undoing or doing of identity that settles the very foundations of being and non-being. Individuals are infinitely indebted to all others, where indebtedness is not about a debt that follows or results from a transaction, but rather a debt that is the condition of possibility of giving and receiving. Ontological indeterminacy, a radical openness, an infinity of possibilities, is at the core of mattering. How strange that indeterminacy and its infinite openness is the condition for the possibility of all structures and their dynamically reconfiguring stabilities and instabilities. Matter in its iterative materialization is a dynamic play of determinacy and indeterminacy. Matter is never a settled matter. It is always already radically open. Closure can't be secured when the conditions of possibilities and impossibilities and lived indeterminacies are integral, not supplementary, to what matter is. Nothingness is not absence, but the infinite plenitude of openness. Infinities are not mere mathematical idealizations, but incarnate marks of determinacy and indeterminacy. Infinities are a constitutive part of all material finities. Representation has confessed its shortcomings throughout history, unable to convey even the palest shadow of the infinite. It has resigned itself to incompetence in dealing with the transcendent, cursing our finitude. But if we listen carefully, we can hear the whispered murmurings of infinity immanent in even the smallest details. Infinity is the ongoing material reconfiguration of nothingness. Infinity is not its flattened and foreshortened projection on a cave wall, but an infinite richness. The idea of finitude as lack is lacking. The presumed lack of ability of the finite to hold the infinite in its finite manifestation seems empirically unfounded and cuts short the infinite agential resources of indeterminacy that are always already at play. Infinity and nothingness are not the termination points defining a line. Infinity and nothingness are infinitely threaded through one another so that every infinitesimal bit of one always already contains the other. The possibilities for justice to come reside in every morsel of finitude. Okay, so I know that's it sounds a little Deepak Chopra. I get that. But I do love how this puts death into a different perspective. And it kind of reminds me of the butterfly story of the Tao. Are we the butterfly in the dream? Are we the man who dreams of the butterfly? Mm-hmm. And I think it's sort of saying like we're both, that there aren't hard delineations or hard endings in beginning. They are always already occurring, that they're inseparable. They require each other. And I think it's a hard shift in perspective to make for me, but I do think there's a revolutionary approach to living in the world in there that I kind of like, supplement to the sort of Buddhist stuff, the Taoist philosophies, these kinds of things. I just think it's a different way I think it's a powerful way of viewing the world that's different from what we are used to here.
Yeah. I think the butterfly story was slightly, you missed part of the nuance of that. It's not just, well, at least the way I've heard it, we'll preface it with that. It's not just that, are you the butterfly or are you the man dreaming he's a butterfly? It's, are you a butterfly dreaming it's a man, or are you a man dreaming it's a butterfly? Both sides are potentially dreaming the other side. It's not whether you exist in the dream or exist in the quote unquote reality. It's how do you know which is the dream?
Right. No, I get that. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, your point still stands. It doesn't really change what you were getting at.
No, that's important though. Yeah. I don't want to misrepresent that. So yeah, I think those are, other than my sinister suggestion, those are my major thoughts. And it's kind of been a whirlwind the last few days. Not just with that, but like lots of things. So it's all, I think I'm just sort of recognizing the importance of embracing change and transformation, because that is what it is. And it's hard to see that sometimes, because you do get into routines. We are very built around wanting to create routines.
Yeah.
Just culturally. And that does sort of obfuscate the reality of.
Yeah. I mean, well, confronting change and existing within change is work. And in general, we like to avoid work. Yeah, I know we have this whole Puritan work ethic, but in general, human beings, especially the human mind, if you want to get into some Daniel Goleman thinking fast and slow action here, the human mind wants to avoid work. It wants to take the easy route. It wants to take the good enough path to understanding and existing within the world, not try to analyze every single nuance from Barad's point of view, not trying to perceive of 100% of all the interactions at once to turn the indeterminacy into determinism, which is theoretically, if determinism exists, only can be happening if you have perfect knowledge of everything, and all the possible interactions that can be existing within a given possibility space.
Yeah.
So the mind doesn't want to do that, and frankly, for our purposes as a meaningful life, a human existence, such detailed knowledge is not necessary for us to exist and navigate the world and pretty much find fulfillment in general. So the mind is not going to waste all of its resources on trying to refine that little tiny bit of extra perfection by by deepening the analysis, by doing all this extra work, it's going to reach the good enough point, or at least that's the idea, is you'll find the balance between perfect knowledge and imperfect knowledge to the good enough. I can get through, I can figure stuff out, I can take that next step with confidence without having to worry about where all the molecules are landing and interacting with one another to make that all possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's why sort of experiencing it can be more powerful, or is more powerful than just thinking about it, which is the sort of like, that's, if you go that way with meditation, the sort of experiencing no self, or if you go with, I lost my second point that I was trying to make.
It's all right.
But for me, it's more just sort of trying to understand conceptually and then lived behavior following that. Because I think I get stuck in behaviors that are detrimental to me and don't understand where those behaviors come from. Mm-hmm. So deconstructing those factors and then reconstructing a different way of perceiving the world and building behaviors around that is sort of where I'm coming at it from, I guess.
Right. And that sort of goes back to where I was going with my lazy brain statement, is that one of the things we do to try to aid our brain to allow it to be lazy but still be productive is we develop habits and rituals and routines, because that allows us to just get in the groove of something that has worked. At least it's worked at one point. That's how we established the pattern, right? We did something, it worked out okay. In theory, it worked out okay because of what you did. And so we fall into this pattern. We keep doing the same thing because it worked out. And as it continues to work out, it gets reinforced and develops into ruts. And those ruts can be beneficial. I mean, sometimes those habits and routines are actually very useful. Yeah. But one part of living a good life, I think, is to not constantly, because we would just burn out, but occasionally, maybe even frequently, try to think slow about those routines. Try to actually look at, what am I doing here? What is working? What is just a habit or a routine? What worked out in the past because of happenstance out of my control, and it just happened to all dovetail with my routine, and so it happened to work out, that might be falling apart now with systems that have changed, with things that have changed. Because, as you were saying, we need to get used to the fact that life is change. And even the most sound routine, the most sound habit that may have worked 10, 5 to however many years ago, or even just yesterday, the situation around it, the entire actor network framework around that routine when it did work, might have shifted just enough that it actually is negative now. We need to be able to, on occasion, look at that, not hold on to this routine because it's a comforting safety blanket of life that allows us to not think, but to actually engage with it on occasion. It's kind of the point of meditation, things like that, forcing you to engage with the minutia that you just assume happens autonomously or autonomous, whatever.
No, I know what you mean.
Autonomic systems that just happens to work, but we need to engage with those every once in a while, because as we live, as the world changes around us, we need to refine those to be, new habits and new rituals, new routines that will work in the new situation that we find ourselves in. And that's a constant in life. But, we do want to create those routines. We do want to create those habits. It's very beneficial. Something that I work on occasion, trying to, hey, here's something I want to achieve in my life. How can I make a habit that either gets me there or gets me in the right direction? Because it's hard for me to get up and consciously choose actively to do the thing that gets me there. It's best to try to set up something that will, without my effort, without me having to use spoons, as the modern parlance would put it, to get me to that point, makes it more likely I will succeed. But it's easy to become addicted to that and get stuck in something that worked in the past but doesn't work in the present or won't work in the future.
Yeah.
And then another thing you were talking about earlier, I know we've had disagreements about this before, the authentic self idea. I'm not going to rehash our disagreements about that. That's beside the point, because I think what you were expressing in that, while I may disagree to a degree with your fundamental underlying thing, I think one thing you said that I do agree with and have expressed multiple times in relation to identity, and even especially Goth identity, is the concept of trying. When you're trying to do or be a thing, that is, in my mind at least, contrary to any sort of authenticity. So if you're trying to be your authentic self, you're not really, in my mind, being your authentic self. You're being what you might want your authentic self to be. It's an aspirational authentic self, but in my, at least my framework of what authenticity is what you are without trying. What you are if you just let yourself go and just let some mystical, natural, central driving force that is just innate in you move you, and then your mind sees what's happening and will live in that. But that's kind of where I go with that is authenticity or identity is not, the identity doesn't come first. The identity is found, is emergent from the system that you exist in the world as you interact with the world, as you feel drawn to certain things, pushed away from other things. What you're drawn to, what you naturally gravitate towards is closer to an identity, and what you should try to, well, there I go saying try. All of a sudden, I'm now jumping into trying. If you're trying to do it, it's a problem. So it's really hard to get rid of that language, because we do have this very agentic perception of how we exist in the world. And frankly, I am not one that likes to engage in those conversations about free will, no free will sort of thing.
Yeah,
because
I don't either.
like the idea of no free will. And I will admit that's my bias. But I also don't see the point of anything if there isn't free will. Then, I mean,
well, you could argue it would probably potentially fundamentally change the way the justice system works and that kind of thing.
I mean, it would change. Our entire society is built around the concept that we are individuals who can act freely and rationally. Both of which are questionable propositions. In the totality, because there are, as the anti-free will people will often express, we aren't 100% free. We have preconceptions and drives and habits and all these things that force our hand to some degree. And the question is just, to what degree do they force our hand? Is it entirely deterministic in that we have no free will because all of our past and our existence controls it completely? Or is it partial? The problem is a lot of the debates come into an all or nothing. The anti-free will person will say, well, if there's anything in you, whether it's trauma responses or pleasure-seeking principle, lizard brain stuff, that allows you to turn off your choice engine and causes you to coast, then you don't have free will because there's some other factor that's driving you. Whereas the pro-free will person will go, well, you know, if we're just matter particles that are interacting on a purely physical realm of whatever physics we understand now and maybe physics we don't understand in the future, that if we understood everything about, like I was saying, all the interactions possible in the space, then we don't have free will, because I can tell you exactly what you would do because I can see all of that, because you're just reacting based on how your composite particles are bouncing against each other and moving through space.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. I think I have a lot of problems with that, with the argument itself, both sort of, it's either, like you're saying, it's either or just sort of how how human focused it is, or just sort of, I think actor network theory sort of subverts that a little bit. That again, it is all about like getting rid of dichotomies in that way, but
it is, and it's about a dialogue between the two things, between the self and the external forces. It's not just being controlled by the external forces and flowing down the stream. It's you're interacting with them, they're interacting with you, and that's what's creating the network.
Yeah, and it's ontologically flat as well, where I don't think either the free will or the determinism is in that way. And I think that's just sort of a lot of philosophy, and well, a lot of science is very, and I think you get more into the science side of things when you talk about determinism, is very focused on humans as the sort of center of consciousness kind of thing. But I think we're talking for a long time, so maybe we'll close our little philosophy podcast here for now.
That's fine.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister suggestions.
I've been kind of watching, but not watching. I've been meaning to watch, and I don't have Apple TV, so I can't watch it directly. But one of my React channels has started watching Severance.
I've heard a lot of good things.
And it's a pretty good React channel, I find. I mean, it's good for me. It's not necessarily good for the TV show and the companies that own the products that they want me to buy and watch.
I think Apple will be okay.
That's fine. I think so too. But I can get a lot of understanding of what a show is about and enjoyment from experiencing it, even though I'm watching two people react to selected clips of a show. But I can get enough of the thread, enough of the philosophy behind it that I can kind of see where it's going. And I think it's a fascinating show. It's really good. It's very enjoyable. It's very kind of brain melting and all that fun stuff. So it's one of those kind of interesting sort of sci-fi concepts. Let's take this idea to the nth degree and see how it would affect society. There's a lot of the reactors like to pull out Black Mirror a lot as a point of reference, and I get that. Twilight Zone, certainly point of reference as well.
Okay.
It's definitely hitting on those things, but it's a fascinating show. Characters really good from what I can see. Like I said, it's in fragments, but enough that I'm kind of getting a feel to how they act. And frankly, and this I have heard the entirety of because I've heard analyses of it, but the soundtrack is wonderful. I love the music from it. It's It's really simple and very good. And what you can see in its entirety on YouTube is the intro sequence, which is brilliant. And I think they won some awards for the intro sequence. So if you just look up the Severance intro sequence, it's a good watch.
I will have to look that up. Yeah. Well, that does fit in with this episode in a way, because I think if I had let it, we definitely could have got into sci-fi discussion territory.
Oh yeah.
My suggestion is also relevant to this episode, and that is the video game Claire Obscure Expedition 33. If you're a gamer, you already know about this game, but it is the primary themes of that game are everything we've discussed today: grief, loss, suicide, and what drives that and what alleviates that, depression, ways to find joy in the midst of meaninglessness. There's even some light existentialist exploration depending on what direction you sort of interpret the story, you could apply an actor network theory framework to the game, but it's presented in a grounded. It's not as cerebral. It's a very grounded, relatable experience of sort of depicting the different ways people react to grief and what that drives them to do and how that affects their relationships. It has, I would say, probably the most impactful and immediately, I don't know what the word would be, but sucks you in the first hour of the video game, depending on how quickly you play through it. The first hour or so is probably the most impactful opening of a video game that I can remember. It's incredibly well done. It's a JRPG, so it's turn-based, but it adds kind of like Dark Souls mechanics in that when the enemy attacks you, you are able to dodge or deflect. So you can mitigate all damage, and you can, if you deflect correctly, you even counterattack as well. So it has all the tropes of JRPGs, which I won't necessarily get into, but it respects your time. It's not like 300 hours. It's a very tight story with enough of the JRPG ephemera in there to sort of scratch that itch. And I think the story is incredibly well told. The acting is incredible. I think it does a great job of just sort of showcasing and exploring death and loss and grief, which isn't often done in video games, at least in like the bigger, more popular video games. A lot of indie games do that in a really impactful way. But I've found the game mechanically, story-wise, the soundtrack also is absolutely incredible. It's been stuck in my head ever since I started playing it. I cannot recommend it enough. I could talk about it for a long time, and I don't want to in this format necessarily. You and I can talk about it later if you want. But yeah, it's even honestly, if you like watching playthroughs more, you could watch the beginning portion, watch someone play the beginning portion of the game, and I think it would still be almost as good. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, it also spawned sort of my favorite of sort of modern reviewer cleverness. They've kind of coined, I don't remember the exact article I saw it in, I found one that sort of referenced it, but a new genre for it. It is not quite a JRPG, it's a JRPG. So J hyphen RPG, like the French.
Yeah, it is an extremely French game.
Yeah, it's a very French game, and it is made by a French company. And actually, one of the other things I saw, it wasn't about Clair Obscur specifically, but they used that as an example. There was this, it was a video I watched about what's good in video games and what's ruining video games. Mm-hmm. And kind of one of the things that they're saying was ruining video games was really a very heavy American influence, though more a capitalist and big company influence, is the flattening of games to sort of a genericized medium or a mean,
right,
to make it sellable. So video games aren't allowed to explore unique cultural identity, unique perspectives. They're genericized to appeal to a large gaming market, whether that market is America, which they were oftentimes portraying it as, but there's also some evidence of that in other large markets, the censoring and modifying of games and other media for, say, the Chinese market or other very large markets. And they were using several games, Clair Obscur being one of them, as a game that does a very good job of evoking a very specific cultural identity that's unique and gives people what this person was, the video person was arguing as is one of the values of media, especially highly interactive media, this ability of perspective taking and of being able to be in somebody else's shoes that is vastly different from you, not just wish fulfillment within your own idiom, within your own culture, but being able to perspective take and be within another culture and learn that culture in a safe way from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. incredibly important and powerful for sure. Yeah, and video games are a very unique medium for that, definitely. Mm-hmm. Well, with that, I think it's time to wrap up. And I'll let you know what we have coming up on our next episode. Our next episode will be July 2nd. And we're going to be speaking with Spencer Sunshine, who recently published the book Neo-Nazi Terrorism and Countercultural Fascism, The Origins and Afterlife of James Mason's Siege. But we're going to be talking specifically about some characters you may know of in the goth and industrial scene and the ways that they shaped various subcultural groupings and their connections to neo-Nazism, specifically people like Boyd Rice, Adam Parfrey, Michael Monaghan, and Nicholas Schreck. So we'll be talking about anti-fascism, quote-unquote countercultural fascism, and the impact that has had on goth, neo-folk, industrial, and so on. If you have enjoyed this episode, enjoyed past episodes, and you would like to support the podcast or get access to things like our Discord, early episode releases, that kind of thing, please head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. Take a look at what kind of rewards you can get for signing up. And be sure to jump into Discord and say hello. It's always lovely to get to see the chat that goes on in there. Thank you again for listening, and until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.